The story opens with a reference to the spirit of healing, a mythical being known for its ability to connect with all things in the world and perform miracles. It is said to possess immense beauty and power, which is why humans revere it as a goddess. Someone reflects that, given such a legendary reputation, the spirit of healing must also be capable of curing his creature, Catlas. It becomes clear that this creature is a dragon, gazing intently at a glowing circle that begins to form. He calls upon the spirit of healing, invoking the name of the great Lord of Time, and demands that it reveal itself. He adds that if granted the power he seeks, he is prepared to offer a worthy price in return. With urgency, he implores the spirit to respond and appear at once. As the summoning ritual reaches completion, a young man is seen lying on a bed, stunned and confused by what is happening. The man and the dragon exchange bewildered glances. The dragon, puzzled by human standards of beauty, remarks on how surprised he is that the one who appeared is just an ordinary human. Nevertheless, he concludes that appearance is irrelevant compared to ability and urges the spirit of healing, now revealed to be the young man, to grant him its power. The young man, overwhelmed, internally wonders if he has finally died. We are introduced to him as Kim Oh-jin, a 32-year-old veterinarian who spent 2 years in pre-veterinary studies and 4 more in veterinary school. At one point, a professor scolds him for dozing off in class and wakes him up sharply. After earning his license, he worked for 3 years as a veterinarian with meager pay. One day, a man visits his clinic asking for help with his pet, admitting he can't afford the costs. Oh-jin, saddened, explains that the clinic is not an animal shelter. Eventually, Oh-jin opens his own practice, naming it Kim Oh-jin's Pet Clinic, though it is in such poor condition that he hasn't even fixed the broken clinic sign. The clinic sits empty, and he appears disheartened by his overall circumstances. His struggles grow worse with mounting rent and loan interest, leading him to thoughts of death, until one night, he hears a strange, disturbing noise while sleeping. He then wakes up in a strange cave, face to face with a massive dragon, and instantly realizes he has been summoned to another world. He wonders whether he died of a heart attack in his sleep, and is now in this surreal situation. The scene around him feels like a version of hell he had once imagined, a freezing cave filled with gold and jewels, a terrifying creature, and a summoning ritual that resembled black magic, all while still in debt. In confusion, Oh-jin asks the dragon what is expected of him now, to which the dragon calmly replies that all he needs to do is heal his pet. Oh-jin imagines the pet must be terrifying, perhaps like a 3-headed beast guarding the gates of hell. But the dragon gently asks Oh-jin to treat his beloved child, and as the dragon moves, dust can be seen gathering on his scales. From beneath one of the dragon's wings, the pet finally appears. It is a small fruit bat named Catlas, with a withdrawn personality. Oh-jin stares at the bat in disbelief, wondering if it really is just a bat. The dragon then asks what Oh-jin thinks, if the creature looks cute to him, while Oh-jin remains visibly unsettled by the whole situation. He quickly notices that the bat looks extremely weak and drained of energy. Switching instinctively into veterinarian mode, Oh-jin begins asking professional questions about the animal's name, how long it has been raised, and when the symptoms first started appearing. The dragon responds that the bat's name is Catlas, and that he has been caring for it for about a week. He adds that raising bats has recently become quite trendy, and we see a gathering of dragons proudly showing off their pet bats. The dragons chat among themselves joyfully, expressing pride in their unusual pets. The dragon explains to Oh-jin that he chose to raise a bat because it seemed popular and fun, and he happened to find this little one stuck near the entrance of a cave, so he decided to keep it. This deeply frustrates Oh-jin, as he despises pet owners who adopt animals merely because they've become fashionable. Oh-jin asked the dragon about the bat's condition, and the dragon explained that it had not been eating properly or consuming much at all. He added that he hunted fresh creatures daily and offered the bat their blood, yet the bat refused to go near it. The dragon had assumed that, like himself, the bat simply had refined tastes. Oh-jin moved closer to the bat to examine it more thoroughly. He grew increasingly irritated by what he heard, recalling unpleasant memories of people who raised animals without knowing the first thing about them. The dragon then innocently asked whether the bat was suffering from a serious illness or merely needed higher quality blood. Oh-jin snapped, clearly agitated, and explained that this was a fruit bat, a species that could never consume blood. The dragon was taken aback. He mentioned that other dragons had told him they fed blood to their bats, prompting Oh-jin to erupt in frustration, emphasizing that there are various species of bats. The one in question was not a vampire bat, but one that feeds solely on fruit. Oh-jin continued scolding the dragon, pointing out that he had unknowingly starved the creature due to his ignorance, and the dragon, embarrassed, admitted that this was his first time raising a bat. Oh-jin then criticized the cave's extremely low temperature, stating that the bat was practically entering hibernation from the cold. The dragon replied that he was an ice dragon and unable to create a warmer environment. The constant reprimanding left the dragon mentally drained. He wondered if the legendary spirit of healing always possessed such intensity. Oh-jin went on to denounce the idea of keeping animals simply because it had become trendy, questioning whether pets were now treated like accessories. The dragon realized he had no adequate response and deeply regretted his actions. Looking down at the bat with a heavy heart, he acknowledged that, despite its small size, it was a living being, and he had a responsibility to care for it. Quietly, the dragon approached Oh-jin and stood behind him while Oh-jin remained still, lost in reflection. When Oh-jin turned around, he saw the dragon gently cradling the bat with great tenderness. The dragon softly apologized to the bat, admitting that its suffering had been the result of his selfishness and ignorance. He promised to bring fresh fruits immediately and vowed to return the bat to the place where he had first found it. The dragon affirmed that the bat's happiness far outweighed his own selfish desires and thanked it for staying with him. Ojin was struck by surprise, beginning to reconsider his initial impression of the place he had deemed hellish. Perhaps it was more rational than he had assumed. The dragon then turned to Ojin and expressed his gratitude for helping him recognize his mistakes. As promised, he stated that Ojin would receive an appropriate reward for lending his power and asked what he wished for. Ojin instinctively replied that, in his next life, he hoped to be reborn as a wealthy Arab oil prince, leaving the dragon utterly confused. Realizing the dragon didn't understand, Ojin changed his wish and said he wanted to reincarnate as the rich son of a famous villain, which only added to the dragon's bewilderment as he failed to comprehend anything Ojin was saying. Ojin, still puzzled, began to wonder about the term spirit, which the dragon kept using repeatedly. Eventually, the dragon decided to gift him a magical tool infused with divine power, explaining that it could create anything he desired. However, he warned that the tool would not function if used with malicious intent, though he was certain Ojin had no such intentions. The dragon thanked him once more, expressing deep appreciation for the help he had provided, and wished for him to return safely. As Ojin prepared to leave, he once again found himself confused, questioning whether this place was truly the afterlife. But then, a realization struck him. He was experiencing something straight out of the fantasy comics he used to read. Growing nervous, he called out, asking the dragon to wait a moment. He shouted desperately just before being sent back, begging the dragon to grant him one final wish, to return to life. Then he hastily added that he wanted to go back to the early days of Bitcoin in particular. At that moment, the dragon was preoccupied with the idea of going to fetch some fruit for the bat. In the next instant, Ojin suddenly found himself in a completely different place. He fell to the ground, deeply regretful for missing what he considered the chance of a lifetime, to go back to the early days of Bitcoin. His regret grew as he thought about the things he could have wished for, like a golden plot of land in a luxurious area, or stocks he had previously invested in that had risen in value. He wished he had been quick enough to think through his desires, only to realize that all he had received was a necklace. Mockingly, he wondered what he could possibly do with a necklace that carried divine power from a dragon who didn't even know how to use it. Pausing to reflect on the necklace, Ojin sarcastically commented that perhaps the dragon had tricked him, as he hadn't explained how to use its power. Suddenly, a large man carrying barrels appeared and shouted angrily at Ojin to get out of the way, prompting Ojin to quickly move aside. Still dazed, he stood in place for a moment, puzzled by everything happening around him, and then heard a vendor calling out that his goods were extremely cheap, which only added to Ojin's confusion. When he turned around, he realized he was in a bustling marketplace filled with people and merchandise, and the surroundings were clearly unlike anything from his own world. As he stood still, observing everything, a man brushed past him roughly, complaining about Ojin standing in the middle of the road. Ojin touched his shoulder, startled by how real everything felt, and began to question whether he had truly come back to life or if his soul had entered another body. Looking around from a higher point, he realized the place was completely unfamiliar, and he was confused, remembering that the dragon had said he would be sent home. Just then, a young fruit seller called out to him warmly, inviting him to buy some delicious fruit. He approached her and, still confused, asked about the place he had ended up in. She replied that he seemed lost due to his odd clothing and assumed he must be a traveler. The vendor explained that he was in a place called Belmore, located in the southern lands of Baron Doyle, an area not particularly known for its landmarks, but quite popular among travelers due to its abundance of inns and shops. When she asked where he had come from, Ojin sarcastically said he was from somewhere very far away and couldn't stop himself from cursing the dragon over the misunderstanding. The vendor smiled and joked that he must be from a very remote village. Suddenly, a loud commotion erupted when a nearby fruit crate fell over, followed by the appearance of a massive rabbit-like creature that began devouring carrots with intense hunger. Information about the creature identified it as a giant rabbit named Elizabeth, known for eating excessively when stressed. Panic spread quickly through the market as people reacted to the chaos caused by the enormous rabbit. Ojin turned to a nearby woman and, in disbelief, asked how such a creature could move freely in the city without any opposition. She told him it was Baron Belmore's pampered pet and advised him to flee immediately. Ojin found it hard to accept that such a beast was being referred to simply as a rabbit, while the woman appeared frustrated that the day's sales had been ruined by the uproar. His concern deepened when he heard a sharp scream in the distance and turned his head anxiously. A small girl was crying out in fear, calling for her mother, while the giant rabbit, Elizabeth, loomed threateningly behind her. The rabbit opened its massive mouth, attempting to swallow the terrified child. Ojin stood frozen in shock, questioning how something like that could be considered a mere rabbit. He then dashed toward the girl, trying desperately to save her. His confusion only grew, as he had never heard of anyone dying from a rabbit bite before. At the last moment, he managed to grab the child and pull her away from the rabbit's gaping jaws. Both he and the girl fell to the ground, and while checking on her condition, he was still trying to make sense of what was happening around him. Just as he tried to reassure himself that at least he had managed to save someone, he was stunned to see the rabbit charging at them once again. Ojin slowly came to the sad realization that he might have doomed both himself and the little girl, and that they could very well die together at that moment. Then, pulling himself together, he told himself that it wasn't his fault, but rather the fault of the owner of the giant rabbit, who had irresponsibly let it roam freely. Suddenly, the necklace he carried began to glow and emit a strange energy. Amid his anger and muttering about the need to restrain such oversized animals, the necklace's power activated unexpectedly. The rabbit was completely caught off guard by the mysterious energy that suddenly bound it, with ropes of light appearing and wrapping tightly around its body, anchoring it in place. Ojin stood there in shock, unable to believe what he had just witnessed, or rather, what he had just done. Everyone around him began staring in astonishment at the unfolding scene. Some onlookers started wondering whether this was magic and if Ojin was a mage, given how easily he had managed to stop the giant rabbit. The children around him were especially awestruck, now convinced that Ojin wasn't just an ordinary traveler but a sorcerer. Ojin himself was deeply confused, uncertain of what was really happening or how he had been able to wield such power so suddenly. At that moment, a wealthy man appeared, rushing toward the giant rabbit, Elizabeth, and calling out to her anxiously, clearly worried for her safety. Turning to his servants in anger, he scolded them for failing to control a single rabbit and declared he would deduct from their wages as punishment. He then returned to the rabbit, speaking to it with excessive gentleness and pleading with it to walk with him again. However, when he saw that the rabbit was bound, he was struck by shock and fury, yelling to know who was responsible. His gaze landed on Ojin, and he confronted him furiously, demanding to know what he had done to his beloved Elizabeth. Ojin tried to apologize politely, explaining that he had been forced to restrain the creature due to the extreme danger it posed, pointing out that someone had nearly died because of it. The man became enraged, dismissing Ojin's words and arrogantly insisting that his precious pet would never harm anyone. He ordered Ojin to release her immediately. This pushed Ojin into a state of seething frustration. He immediately classified the man among those pet owners he deeply disliked, the kind who always insisted their animals were harmless no matter what. Then, with biting sarcasm, Ojin lashed out at the man, asking whether, if he was so sure of his pet's innocence, he'd be willing to stick his head inside the rabbit's mouth to prove it. The people around them were visibly impressed and thrilled by Ojin's bold words, especially the fruit vendor and her brother, who were secretly urging him to keep going. At that point, Ojin turned his gaze back to the rabbit, observing it closely and trying to better understand the situation. He made an effort to control his anger, reminding himself that he was a grown, educated man who needed to respond calmly. He began contemplating the type of rabbit it might be, noting from its ears that it appeared to be a lop-eared rabbit, a breed not meant to be out wandering in such crowded places. He explained to the rich man that rabbits are territorial and highly sensitive creatures, and asked whether he had noticed any aggressive behavior or signs of self-harm from the animal. The man, stunned by Ojin's accuracy, admitted that the rabbit had recently been pulling out its fur repeatedly. Ojin explained that such behavior was a clear sign of intense stress, warning that the rabbit might become seriously ill or even die prematurely if this continued. The man was shocked and deeply alarmed by this, asking in disbelief whether Ojin meant that Elizabeth could die. Ojin advised him to stop subjecting the rabbit to such strange outings. The man then asked how the rabbit would get the exercise it needed, to which Ojin replied that it was entirely possible to provide that even indoors. He then questioned, with genuine curiosity, how the rabbit had even grown to such a massive size. Ojin continued to explain gently, assuring the man that he understood his deep affection for Elizabeth, but reminded him that rabbits were extremely sensitive creatures. He added that affection alone wasn't enough. They needed proper care and a solid understanding of their needs. The man looked surprised and moved by Ojin's words, admitting that it was clear he truly cared about rabbits. Embarrassed, Ojin denied it, but the man went on to explain that people often mocked him for raising rabbits, claiming it was a hobby suited for noblewomen, and that he was genuinely happy to meet someone who appreciated rabbits as he did. The man then asked if Ojin worked in animal care, and Ojin responded hesitantly that he did, in a way. The man immediately ordered his servant to bring all his belongings quickly. The servant handed Ojin a sum of money and politely asked him to accept it and to check on Elizabeth's health from time to time. The man then left with his giant rabbit and attendants, apologizing affectionately to Elizabeth and promising her rest and delicious food at home. Ojin stood stunned, holding the money he had just received, realizing that this might not be the kind of place he'd visit often. In the next moment, people gathered around him excitedly, thanking him for finally putting an end to the giant rabbit's chaos. They rushed toward him, warmly welcoming and celebrating his actions, expressing their joy at his courage in confronting the arrogant baron. The fruit vendor approached him with a smile, thanking him and saying that, thanks to him, she could finally work in peace. She offered him a special discount on apples, but Ojin replied awkwardly that he didn't have any money since he had just arrived in the area. She smiled and pointed to the money the baron had given him, remarking that money was the one thing the baron had in abundance. Ojin opened the pouch in surprise to find it filled with gleaming gold coins. He bit into one to check its authenticity, and the vendor laughed, assuring him that those were indeed the standard gold coins used here. A rush of excitement stirred in Ojin as he began thinking that if he could return to his own world with such valuable coins, universally valuable across worlds, he'd be in a remarkable position. His eyes sparkled at the sight of the gold, and he started wondering about real estate prices in the area. It suddenly struck him that this opportunity might be far better than Bitcoin, and he decided to open a second branch of his veterinary clinic in this new world. He also planned to use the profits he'd earn here to pay off the debts of his original clinic. Sometime later, Ojin was seen sitting on a chair in what looked like an official setting, thanking a group of people for attending. The attendees appeared tense and uncertain about what was to come, while Ojin explained that he hoped to select one of them for a certain task. Leaning forward slightly, he announced the beginning of the event, emphasizing that what was about to happen was a matter of life or death, an interview to choose staff for his animal clinic. Earlier, the baron had approached Ojin and asked if he planned to settle down in the area. Generously, he offered him a house, money, or even land to help him get started. Thanks to the Baron's generous support, the second branch of Kim Oh-jin's animal clinic opened smoothly without any difficulties. Oh-jin came to realize that the most important thing in life was to have strong, beneficial relationships, to the point that he found himself silently expressing sincere gratitude. "I love you." Upon learning of Oh-jin's intention to settle in the area, the Baron personally prepared an entire shop for him, stocked with all kinds of rabbit care supplies. While cleaning and organizing the place, Oh-jin expressed mild surprise at the sheer number of grooming tools for rabbits, but quickly dismissed the thought, since it had all been provided to him for free. As he continued tidying up his new shop, Oh-jin began to reflect on what remained ahead, successfully running the clinic and earning profits. However, a sense of unease crept over him due to how little he actually knew about this new world, especially concerning the dragon who had brought him here. He wondered whether he would need to find the dragon in order to return to his original world. With that in mind, he decided to search for a new employee who might be able to provide him with essential information. He hung up a job posting outlining the qualifications required to work at his clinic. Soon, the personal interviews for applicants at Kim Oh-jin's animal clinic began. Seated before them, Oh-jin asked the candidates to introduce themselves in order from the right. The first applicant introduced himself as Thomas, the second son of a prestigious family, claiming to be well-mannered, respectful, and physically strong. But to Oh-jin, he came across as dull and lacking personality, prompting him to give Thomas an average score. Oh-jin noted on the evaluation sheet that this type of person lacked individuality, and that he preferred candidates with more distinct character. The second candidate, named Philip, said his family had been working with animals for generations, which piqued Oh-jin's curiosity, leading him to ask what kind of work that involved. Philip calmly smiled and explained that his family owned a butcher shop, and that he had been working with animals since childhood, mastering the art of using knives. This response deeply unsettled Oh-jin. He sarcastically jotted down a note on the evaluation form recommending that the police be contacted, as he was highly disturbed by such a background. Then came the third candidate, whose appearance was so intimidating that Oh-jin couldn't help but wonder whether the man had ever dismembered someone. Still, he decided not to jump to conclusions based solely on looks, and politely asked what had motivated him to apply, and whether he felt nervous. But the man suddenly erupted with intense enthusiasm, declaring that he had been searching for Oh-jin for a long time, and begged him, almost manically, to let him become his shoe. After that incident, Oh-jin resolved to rely on appearances when judging people from now on. The third candidate began approaching Oh-jin in a strange and threatening manner, repeatedly chanting the word magic, which caused Oh-jin to feel deeply anxious and fearful. Meanwhile, the fourth candidate, a woman, sat silently observing the situation. She calmly asked when her turn would come, even as the third man closed in menacingly. Oh-jin cried out to her in desperation, shocked that she would ask such a question so calmly while he was under attack. At that point, the woman wondered aloud whether she should step in and handle the situation herself. She quickly sprang into action, striking the third man with incredible force and saving Oh-jin from the dangerous encounter, knocking the man to the ground. The third applicant collapsed unconscious after the powerful blow, and calm was restored to the room. With composure, the fourth candidate introduced herself as Selena. She continued speaking with confidence, explaining that she was a traveling animal expert, skilled in first aid treatment. Oh-jin looked at her with admiration and full confidence, and without hesitation, declared her hired with a perfect score. He shook Selena's hand formally, officially welcoming her to the clinic as a technical specialist. Later, Oh-jin sat in his new clinic, enjoying the warmth of the sunlight as he took in the place he had just opened. However, the comfort didn't last long. He began to feel uneasy when he noticed that Selena had not arrived for work on time. Sitting in thought, Oh-jin admitted to himself that perhaps he had been too hasty in hiring Selena the day before, and started thinking about a suitable spot to hang a new job posting. Suddenly, he heard a knock at the door, and assumed the employee who hadn't shown up on time had finally arrived. Oh-jin opened the door with a big smile, welcoming who he thought was the staff member, and gently asked whether she had eaten lunch properly. However, he was surprised to find that the person standing there was not Selena, but rather a young stranger who laughed and replied that he hadn't eaten yet, then wondered aloud whether he should eat first. Oh-jin, clearly confused, asked who he was. Despite the unexpected situation, Oh-jin decided to receive him politely, invited him inside to sit down, and offered him either water or tea. The young man chose tea. As Oh-jin began preparing the tea, he felt a great sense of joy, thinking to himself that this was the first customer of his clinic's second branch, what he saw as the first step toward paying off his debts. He was determined to succeed this time, having carefully studied all the reasons why the first branch had failed. He recalled how, at his previous clinic, clients would often complain when he advised them to properly care for their pets, such as brushing their teeth regularly. Back then, clients would grumble about how difficult such care was. Oh-jin, quick to anger at the time, would respond with sarcastic remarks about their negligence, which eventually led to negative online reviews. Those reviews had deeply affected him, and he came to regret his reactions. Reflecting on that, Oh-jin resolved to keep his temper under control this time and focus on offering excellent service. He then asked the young man about the pet he had brought for treatment. The young man pulled his pet from his pocket, a small red creature named Bojack, which he described as a cute little lizard. Oh-jin examined the creature closely and felt relieved that it was just a normal lizard, after having feared that all animals in this world would be bizarre, like the giant rabbit. Still, he was puzzled to see the lizard in the young man's pocket instead of in a proper cage, and carefully asked whether it was in his pocket because it had destroyed its cage. The young man replied enthusiastically that it looked cuter that way, and that carrying it in his pocket made it even more lovable. Ojin grew extremely frustrated by the young man's careless behavior and nearly lost his temper again, but managed to restrain himself with difficulty. Trying to calm down, he asked the young man in a composed tone why he had brought the lizard to the clinic and whether it was sick. The young man explained that Bojack wasn't exactly ill, but was very weak and sensitive to the cold. Ojin responded calmly, noting that such sensitivity was typical for lizards. The young man went on to say, with some concern, that the lizard's tail had fallen off the moment he grabbed it. Ojin, clearly uneasy, replied that this was normal for lizards and advised him not to hold it by the tail again. The young man kept smiling as he asked Ojin to simply make the lizard healthier. At that moment, Ojin recalled the ice dragon who had once come to him with a similar complaint about his pet, and realized once again that the problem always lay with the owners, not the animals themselves. Nevertheless, Ojin decided to run a quick checkup on the lizard, as he didn't trust its owner, and asked the young man to hand it over. As Ojin began examining the lizard's skin, he was puzzled by its condition. He eventually diagnosed it with a condition known as disectitis, which refers to improper skin shedding. The young man appeared surprised by this strange diagnosis. He warned Ojin that Bojack was a bit aggressive since it had lived in the streets, and told him to be cautious while handling it. Suddenly, the lizard's appearance changed drastically. Its eyes ignited with blazing fire, shocking and frightening Ojin. In the next instant, the lizard launched a massive fireball straight at Ojin, leaving him utterly stunned. Ojin attempted to dodge the sudden attack from the creature in his hands. At the last moment, Selena burst into the room and tried to save Ojin from the dangerous fire assault. Continuing the events, Selena looked at Ojin with a serious expression, pointing out that he had nearly taken a direct hit from a fire salamander. She expressed her frustration, saying she almost lost her boss on her very first day at work. Ojin was slammed against the wall from the force of the blow, visibly stunned and in pain. Still aching, he muttered sarcastically that taking the fireball might have been better than the hit he had just received. He then began examining the salamander, Bojack, the very first patient in his new clinic, and noted that he couldn't touch it directly, as it might release fire if it felt threatened. Selena asked if they had a fire-resistant suit, while the salamander's owner seemed fascinated by how beautiful his pet was. Ojin asked him where he had gotten it from. The young man explained that he had found it on a mountain near his home, and with great enthusiasm, said he had fallen in love with it at first sight, and brought it home immediately. He then jokingly asked Selena if she was jealous of his pet, but she responded coldly, denying it. Moments later, Selena clarified that capturing salamanders in that region was illegal, as they were wild creatures and not easily kept by humans. The young man was shocked upon hearing that, and anxiously asked whether he could still keep it, admitting that he had grown very attached to Bojack. Selena firmly told him he couldn't, as it was against the law, but she tried to reassure him a little. She suggested a temporary solution, that they say they were only keeping the salamander for medical treatment and would release it back into the wild once it had recovered. However, the young man strongly rejected the idea of saying goodbye to his beloved Bojack. In a mix of sorrow and anger, he shouted that he wouldn't accept it. He suddenly bolted out of the clinic with the salamander in his arms, shouting that they should just leave him alone so he and Bojack could live together in peace. Ojin was completely baffled by the strange behavior of the young man and wondered aloud what was wrong with him, while Selena suggested he might have simply gone home. But Ojin burst out at her in frustration, asking how she could just stand there and watch everything unfold without doing anything to stop him, especially when treatment hadn't even begun yet. He then sternly ordered her to go after him at once. Selena, clearly nervous, agreed immediately, while the question remained, would Ojin succeed in his very first treatment? Meanwhile, life in town had become noticeably calmer and more pleasant, especially now that the Baron's giant rabbit was no longer around. A fruit vendor remarked with a smile that life was indeed better, so long as the giant rabbit was too busy playing with the Baron to cause any more trouble. But soon, a bizarre scene unfolded before the vendor's eyes, the young man sprinting down the street with Selena and Ojin chasing closely behind. The young man looked terrified, clutching Bojack tightly, while Selena and Ojin raced to catch up. Ojin, completely exhausted from the chase, could barely speak as he pleaded with the young man to stop. Watching the strange scene, the fruit vendor quietly muttered in fear that she had no idea what was going on, but she'd rather not get involved or ask. The young man, overwhelmed with fear, ran while wondering in deep sadness why they were chasing him and trying to take Bojack away. As he ran, he began to cry, holding Bojack tightly, and promising that he would never let anyone separate them. Ojin, furious and completely worn out, shouted at the top of his lungs, trying to convince the young man to stop because Bojack urgently needed to shed his skin. Eventually, Ojin came to a stop, leaning against a wall, panting heavily, with Selena standing next to him. She commented sarcastically that he really needed to exercise a bit more. Then, shifting to a serious tone, she asked if Bojack truly hadn't shed his skin, as he claimed. Ojin, still catching his breath, confirmed it was true, explaining that 2 or 3 layers of skin had built up and needed to be removed immediately. Selena became visibly worried upon hearing this, and firmly stated that they needed to act fast, prompting Ojin to question why she was suddenly so alarmed. She began to explain the severity of the situation, saying that when a salamander fails to shed its skin, fire builds up inside its body. Once that fire reaches a critical level, and the salamander can no longer endure it, the result would be a dangerous explosion. Meanwhile, the young man was still running, clutching Bojack tightly, his face filled with fear, while Selena continued explaining that such an explosion could result in a devastating catastrophe. Ojin agreed with her, clearly expressing his concern that the salamander's explosion wouldn't just harm its owner, it could destroy the entire area. Tension and anxiety were written all over Ojin's face as he said they had to find the salamander quickly before it was too late. At that moment, the young man reached his home and locked the door behind him, feeling a bit reassured, thinking that he was finally safe and no one would catch up with him. He spoke to Bojack with relief, telling him they were now safe, and once again promised that no one would ever separate them. Overwhelmed with emotion, he decided to celebrate the moment by composing a song and began looking for a piece of paper to write the lyrics. During that time, strange signs began to appear on Bojack. His body emitted an unnatural glow, indicating that an explosion was imminent, but the young man, lost in his excitement over the song, didn't notice. He continued singing enthusiastically, pouring his feelings into lyrics about the power of love. Just then, Bojack's body ignited in a terrifying blaze, his eyes glowing with intense fire. The young man, smiling innocently, turned to him and asked how he liked the song. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted from the fire building up inside the salamander, and a giant fireball blasted toward the young man. He was thrown to the floor by the force of the blast, writhing in pain and struggling to understand what had just happened. When he came to, the room around him was engulfed in flames, and he was overcome with panic and disbelief. He turned to Bojack, shouting in confusion, asking what had happened and whether Bojack had caused the fire. He cautiously approached the salamander, his voice filled with fear, asking why it had gotten so angry and why it had set the place ablaze. Slowly reaching out his hand, he said they had to get out quickly, as the situation had become dangerous. But Bojack responded aggressively. His fire flared up again, signaling another attack. He launched a fireball directly at the young man, who stood there in disbelief, insisting that Bojack would never hurt him because they were family. At the last second, Ojin heroically intervened, saving the young man from the salamander's deadly attack and grabbing the creature with his bare hands, trying to restrain it. Bojack flared up in Ojin's hands, fiercely resisting. Alarmed, Ojin shouted to Selena, asking if the salamander's rampage meant it would now attack humans too. Selena confirmed that it had completely lost control, and if they didn't calm it down soon, it would unleash even more fire, making it absolutely necessary to stop it immediately. Ojin, still holding the struggling creature, was deeply confused, unsure how to calm it in such a violent state. The flames surrounding Bojack grew more intense, and the situation became increasingly dangerous. At that critical moment, the magical pendant given to Ojin by the dragon began to glow brightly, radiating with mystical energy. Suddenly, an item Ojin had been thinking about, a fire extinguisher, appeared before him, conjured by the pendant's magic. He was stunned by what had just occurred, his face filled with astonishment. Without hesitation, he began using the fire extinguisher on the salamander, trying to put out the flames and take control of the situation. After a few bursts of the extinguisher, Bojack's appearance changed dramatically. He transformed into a small, gentle white creature, visibly confused and no longer raging. Holding the extinguisher, Ojin was surprised and admitted that the pendant from the dragon was proving to be extremely useful. Meanwhile, the flames inside the house began to die down gradually. Selena approached the young man to reassure him that things were now somewhat under control and gently asked if he was all right. Still in shock, the young man muttered the word rampage in disbelief, struggling to grasp what had just taken place. Then, as realization dawned on him, he sadly admitted that this explained why Bojack had attacked. If he had let him shed his skin, none of this would have happened. But with a renewed sense of optimism, he said it was good that he now understood and promised that, from now on, he would take better care of the salamander. Ojin, watching this unexpectedly cheerful reaction, couldn't help but be surprised by the young man's simplicity. Ojin, both angry and bewildered, asked the young man if that was really all he had to say after everything that had happened. The young man, clearly confused and flustered, didn't know how to respond. Trying to calm Ojin, he said that his feelings toward the salamander had never changed and that they could simply rebuild the house. Ojin exploded in frustration, raising his voice as he told him that, had the fire continued even a little longer, it could have spread to the neighboring houses and harmed others. Being safe himself wasn't enough. The young man, anxious, replied that this was why he had said he would take better care of the salamander from now on, asking if that wasn't what mattered now. Ojin had nothing left to say. He simply placed his hand on his face and sighed in deep exasperation. Then he began explaining calmly that wild animals shouldn't be raised recklessly, as they have their own environments and natural habitats. Selena added that bringing animals home just because they're cute, without understanding their nature or needs, was a mistake, and asked if he really considered that to be love. Ojin then asked whether the young man was confident he could control the salamander if it ever lost control again. The young man, saddened and hesitant, admitted that he couldn't. Ojin gently but firmly explained that love and affection alone were not enough to properly care for an animal. A heavy silence fell over them as the three stood still, each lost in thought. Later, Ojin and Selena brought the salamander back to the forest to return it to its natural environment. Ojin remarked that Bojack looked healthier now after shedding his skin, and Selena agreed, adding that he looked good too. At that moment, the salamander revealed its true form, larger and more powerful now that it had cast off its old skin, leaving both Ojin and Selena astonished. Ojin, staring in disbelief, wondered how such a large body had fit inside the small skin. Selena replied calmly that this was the mystery of nature. The young man gazed at the salamander with sorrow, thinking that now it had grown so big, it wouldn't need his help anymore. Deeply moved, he reflected that Bojack was returning to the vast embrace of nature. Smiling through tears, he told the salamander that he wished him happiness, and that he was letting him go because he loved him. He then broke down, crying loudly as he told the salamander to eat well, sleep well, and remember him from time to time. He promised to come every day to leave him food, but Ojin advised against it, warning that such behavior would erase the salamander's natural instincts. As the young man continued to cry, the salamander darted into the forest, while the young man whispered to himself that he would always be with him in spirit. He wept loudly as he watched Bojack run swiftly toward his freedom. Selena gently comforted the young man, explaining that salamanders didn't understand the idea of having an owner, and that he shouldn't be sad about the abrupt farewell. Then, perhaps a bit coldly, she added that the salamander had likely seen him only as someone who brought it food. This only deepened the young man's despair, and he questioned whether that was truly what Selena called comfort. The three of them sat in the forest, the young man still crying bitterly. Ojin joked that maybe the salamander had thought of him as someone who cleaned up after him too. Just then, the salamander appeared atop a rock, gathering its energy to form a massive fireball. A powerful explosion followed as the salamander released its flames, drawing everyone's attention in astonishment. From the blast, a display of colorful fireworks lit up the sky, an unexpected spectacle caused by Bojack's unique abilities. Ojin and Selena watched the fireworks with fascination, while the young man looked on, deeply moved and amazed by what his beloved Bojack had done, proudly commenting on the stunning show. He then looked up at the sky with a joyful smile, praising the salamander as incredible. It was at that moment that the successful treatment of the clinic's first patient, the fire salamander, was officially marked. Sometime later in a public square near a fountain, people had gathered to enjoy the lively atmosphere and music being performed by a local entertainer. The young man appeared on stage, singing passionately, and introducing himself as the singer, Roisha. He sang about Ojin, describing him as the great wizard who defeated the Lord's giant rabbit and opened his eyes like a true poet. Next to him, a children's choir joined in, singing cheerfully about Ojin, saying that he loved animals and that his touch was like a mother's, making everyone feel better. A percussionist joined the performance, adding to the energy and excitement of the crowd. At that moment, some people in the audience made sarcastic remarks about the singer, and Selena, puzzled, questioned whether he was truly the talented artist everyone claimed him to be. While Ojin stood among the spectators, bewildered by the strange song, those around him began excitedly asking about the identity of the wizard being praised in the lyrics. It suddenly hit Ojin that the song had brought him a great deal of fame, and now many people wanted to visit his clinic after hearing it. Days later, crowds gathered in front of Kim Ojin's animal clinic, banging on the door and shouting to know when it would open, demanding treatment from him. Inside, Ojin sat overwhelmed, clutching his head from the stress and headaches caused by the non-stop wave of clients. Selena stood nearby, asking if she could resign due to sheer exhaustion, though she also admitted the clinic was experiencing unprecedented success. In the days that followed, the steady flow of patients didn't stop. Ojin began to feel severely worn out from the constant work, and his demeanor became intimidating during consultations due to the pressure. With a tired smile, he politely told a client to return next week for a follow-up, while internally lamenting that he might be dead from exhaustion before then. Selena laughed and told him to make as much money as he could now, to which Ojin, drained, replied that he also needed to survive as long as possible, and then asked her to bring in the next patient. 2 months after the clinic's opening, thanks to the viral song, it remained packed with clients, much to Ojin's amazement. Despite the difficulties of the early days, the profits had been excellent, bringing great joy to both Ojin and Selena. At that moment, a new visitor entered and politely asked if the clinic was still open. Though exhausted, Ojin welcomed him in with a smile, calling it financial healing. During this time, Ojin had come to notice that this world wasn't all that different from his own when it came to raising animals. Outside, people casually discussed their pets' health, just like they would have back in his original world. The townsfolk raised cats and dogs and cared deeply for their well-being, mirroring the behavior he was used to. However, despite the similarities, Ojin found the species here to be slightly different, and this subtle difference added to his fatigue. While he was lying down, completely drained, Selena told him that the next patient would be the last one, which brought him some relief. He asked about the type of animal awaiting treatment, and Selena replied that its name was Shaman, a breed of hunting dog that had recently become popular as a trendy pet. Ojin expressed his disapproval of people adopting animals just for fashion trends, wishing those kinds of owners would simply disappear. Selena warned Ojin that this breed was known for being extremely aggressive toward anyone who wasn't its owner, and that its claws and fangs were sharp enough to pierce the hide of a wild boar with ease. Despite the intimidating description, Ojin greeted the pet owner kindly as he entered the room. When the cage was opened, a small, adorable white puppy emerged, shaking violently and clearly terrified, despite the breed's reputation for aggression. Selena then casually mentioned that she had forgotten to say the dog was only 3 months old, which took Ojin by surprise. The owner nervously asked if the dog might be injured, since it had been limping since the previous day, while Ojin silently wondered where the little dog's legs even were. He began examining the puppy carefully to determine the cause of the limp. Thinking to himself that a 3-month-old's joints should be in good shape, he soon noticed something odd. He found a small thorn lodged in the dog's paw, and the puppy let out a soft whimper of pain. Gently removing the thorn, Ojin reassured the owner that it had just been a minor issue, and that the dog would be perfectly fine now. Ojin carefully disinfected the injured area, while the puppy looked content and relaxed after the thorn was removed. Watching the little dog play on the table like a ball of fluff filled Ojin with joy. He smiled, satisfied, while Selena silently observed him. The dog's owner left the clinic, visibly relieved and happy, and at last, Ojin let out a deep sigh of relief, saying he had finally finished work for the day. Selena looked at Ojin, who was lying back on his desk, and told him that he seemed especially cheerful today, which caught him slightly off guard. She asked if his happiness came from how cute the dog was, or simply because he was done with work, gazing at him with curiosity. Irritated, Oh-jin asked why she even cared, but she coolly replied that she was just glad to see him happy for reasons that had nothing to do with money. This led Oh-jin to accuse her of mocking him again, as usual. He then calmly explained that his happiness came from the fact that none of the animals he had treated that day were seriously injured. He remembered to himself that the hardest part of being a veterinarian was constantly seeing sick or suffering animals. The more he cared about them, the more it hurt, which was why, in the past, he had tried to suppress his emotions and act more detached, but he never truly succeeded. He recalled a past incident involving a client who had left her sick pet with him for an extended period while she went on vacation, which had deeply infuriated him. Since then, Oh-jin had developed a habit of treating pet owners more sternly than before. At the end of the day, he asked Selena to quickly tidy up so they could close the clinic before nightfall. But suddenly, a strange man appeared at the window, staring eerily and knocking forcefully on the glass. The man began shouting frantically, calling for Oh-jin and desperately asking for help. Startled by the man's appearance, Oh-jin jokingly asked Selena if she knew how to exorcise evil spirits, to which she suggested brute force instead. Suddenly, the man burst through the window, screaming for urgent assistance. He rushed in and grabbed Oh-jin, dragging him outside in a frenzy. Selena stayed behind, watching the scene through the window in complete bewilderment. Oh-jin collapsed to the ground, exhausted from being yanked out so suddenly, while the man quickly apologized. The man sarcastically commented on Oh-jin's lack of physical fitness and his inability to climb a hill, prompting Oh-jin to tell him angrily to shut up. When Oh-jin asked who he was, the man apologized again, saying he had forgotten to introduce himself. He introduced himself as Schwein, a local civil servant in charge of the area. Suddenly, Schwein dropped to his knees and begged Oh-jin for help, saying he had heard about how Oh-jin once managed to calm the Lord's giant rabbit. In a state of desperation, Schwein pleaded with Oh-jin to help them capture a stray dog, leaving Oh-jin puzzled by the strange request. Oh-jin, supported by Selena, clarified that they weren't an animal rescue team. He was just a vet, and he didn't go around chasing animals. But Schwein continued begging, telling Oh-jin that he was their only hope now. Oh-jin, confused, asked when exactly he became anyone's last hope, and Schwein sorrowfully replied that they genuinely didn't have any time left. Selena, baffled, asked what he meant by time, prompting Schwein to explain that around 2 months ago, a dog had taken control of a specific area in the mountains. He went on to say that the area the dog had claimed was part of the route for a planned road construction project, and despite multiple attempts, they had failed to catch it due to its incredible speed. Oh-jin, concerned, asked what would happen if they couldn't catch the dog in time. Schwein explained that the government would send official forces to take over the situation, and if the animal proved too difficult to capture, it would be killed immediately. The revelation that the dog would be executed shocked Oh-jin deeply. Schwein began pleading again, more urgently than before, repeating that they were out of time and begging for help once more. As he stood there in desperation, Oh-jin and Selena remained silent, caught in a moment of serious reflection. Oh-jin stood silently for a moment, overwhelmed by a mix of confusion and concern about the situation. Eventually, he let out a sigh and scratched his head in frustration, asking Schwein where the dog was currently located. Oh-jin clarified again that he was a veterinarian, not someone who had ever captured animals before, but admitted that he at least needed to take a look at the dog in order to form a suitable plan. Schwein was overjoyed to hear this and eagerly informed him that the dog was nearby, just a little higher up the slope. Still, Oh-jin emphasized that he hadn't officially agreed to help yet. He was just going to assess the situation first. Selena, however, thought to herself that it was already obvious Oh-jin had made up his mind to help. When they reached the location, Schwein pointed out the exact spot, explaining that the dog never left that area. Oh-jin and Selena exchanged uneasy glances as they spotted the dog in the distance. The dog appeared extremely intimidating, baring its teeth and growling aggressively. Oh-jin turned to Selena and, with concern, asked if this was the same shaman breed she had mentioned earlier. Selena confirmed it was. The dog stood before them in a pitiful state, covered in dirt, visibly exhausted and furious. Selena looked at Oh-jin and once again explained that many people had recently started adopting this breed just because it was trendy. She added with a detached tone that many owners abandoned them just as quickly as they acquired them, leaving these animals homeless and angry. The dog remained in a defensive stance, clearly ready to attack, which heightened Oh-jin's anxiety. Looking at the dog with sorrow, he thought to himself that it was obvious the animal hadn't eaten properly for the past 2 months, given its thin, worn-out condition. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed from a distance, catching everyone's attention as they turned to locate the source. Oh-jin noticed slow, deliberate footsteps approaching, and he began to wonder if there was another creature nearby besides the dog. At that moment, the dog became even more aggressive and let out a loud, fierce bark. Without warning, it charged at Oh-jin with incredible speed, attacking him violently and catching him off guard. Selena quickly grabbed Oh-jin and pulled him away from the dog's charge, shouting that what he had just done was extremely dangerous. As they ran, Selena explained that the worst thing one could do when facing an aggressive dog was to flee and turn their back on it. Oh-jin shouted back sarcastically, asking if she meant he should have just stood there and let the dog maul him to death. But Selena quickly responded that running only excites the dog more, and that they needed to find a way to distract it fast. Unexpectedly, the dog stopped chasing them, which surprised everyone and left them confused by its sudden change in behavior. Selina, puzzled, asked why the dog had halted, especially since it was supposed to be one of the aggressive hunting breeds. Schwein confirmed that it indeed was. Ojin, bewildered, questioned why the dog had retreated when it had been so close and so clearly enraged. The dog slowly and tiredly walked back toward a nearby dark cave, its body visibly drained. Ojin noted that it had returned to the exact spot it had started from, which piqued his curiosity even more. Selina calmly commented that canine behavior was often difficult to interpret, while Schwein noted that the dog had always chased people like this. He added that these repeated incidents were the reason villagers had filed constant complaints about the animal. Ojin kept staring, deeply contemplative, without saying a word. After a moment, he asked Schwein what kind of complaints the villagers had made exactly. Schwein explained that they were mainly about an aggressive dog barking in the mountains, which people believe posed a threat, leading them to demand its removal. Ojin then seriously asked if anyone had actually been injured by the dog, and Schwein hesitated before answering. After a brief awkward silence, Schwein admitted that no one had been hurt so far. He confirmed that the complaints had only been about barking and disturbances, not about actual injuries or attacks. Turning to Selina, Ojin asked if she had previously told him that shaman dogs were known for their strong loyalty to their owners. Selina confirmed the fact once again. Selina calmly asked Ojin if he had figured anything out from the dog's behavior, but he remained silent, deep in thought. The next day, Ojin and Selina headed to the village nearest to the mountain. Selina, puzzled, asked why they were going to the village instead of returning to where the dog was. Ojin explained that their task now was not to capture the dog, but to find its former owner. Selina was surprised by this decision and argued that it would be faster to catch the dog directly since time was limited. She even suggested setting up a bait trap, assuming the dog was hungry. However, Ojin responded that he didn't believe food alone would be enough to lure the dog. Surprised, Selina asked him why he thought that, and Ojin explained that if hunger were the dog's only problem, it wouldn't be in such a poor state. He added calmly that something mattered more to the dog than food. Ojin clarified his thought further, saying that the commands given by the dog's previous owner were probably more important to it than food itself. He imagined a possible moment between the dog and its owner, a scenario in which the owner left and told the dog to stay in that exact spot, promising to return soon. Back then, the dog had likely been happy and obedient to those commands. He continued his reflection with sadness, saying the owner must have told the dog not to leave the place, and Selina added that she had met people like that in her own village too. Ojin, filled with anger, expressed his resentment toward people who abandoned their pets while ordering them to stay, never returning. He said that if he ever found that person, he'd hit him first, then drag him along to show him what his dog had become. He emphasized the importance of making the dog's former owner see the consequences of his actions. Ojin and Selina began asking around the village about the dog's owner. One woman complained that Gabriel's husband, a woodcutter, could no longer cut trees due to his fear of the dog. Some children said they didn't know the owner either, but mentioned that their mothers wouldn't let them go near the mountain because of the dog. Eventually, they encountered an elderly man who seemed confused and began shouting, asking which dog they meant. He angrily suggested they were talking about the dog that had taken all his money 10 years ago. Feeling exhausted, Ojin sat on the ground beside one of the buildings. Selina approached and stood silently in front of him. She broke the silence by wondering aloud if the dog's owner might be someone from outside the village, then added that the only clear thing was that everyone in the village hated the stray dog. Ojin, still confused, questioned how it could be that no one in the village knew the owner. But before he could finish his thought, a girl approached and interrupted, saying that the villagers indeed didn't know anything about it. She came closer and asked Ojin directly if he was looking for the stray dog's owner, adding that he was the first person to ask about Jake. Surprised, Ojin asked eagerly if she actually knew the dog's owner. The girl then asked him to come with her. Ojin and Selina followed the girl to a house slightly outside the village. As they walked, she explained that Jake had lived away from the villagers, which was why no one really knew him well. When they arrived, Ojin stepped forward and knocked on the door, thinking to himself that Jake must have lived there alone with his dog, far from everyone else. But no one was inside. The girl turned to Ojin and gently told him Jake wasn't home, then asked him to follow her to another place. Still confused, Ojin followed her, only to be shocked when they stopped in front of a grave nearby. It dawned on Ojin with sudden weight that the place she had brought him to was Jake's grave. The girl began to explain that Jake had passed away 2 months earlier in a landslide accident, and she added sorrowfully that Jake had lived alone, but was a very kind-hearted man. She continued, saying that while the villagers had blamed the dog's owner, Jake had never abandoned his dog. He simply hadn't been able to return to him because of the accident. Ojin stood in silent reflection before the grave, deeply affected by what he had just learned, while the girl continued speaking with sadness, saying she had tried to bring the dog back herself, but failed. She went on, her voice trembling, to tell Ojin that if he had come for that dog named Max, then she begged him to help him. Ojin recalled an old image of Jake and his dog Max, both smiling happily, and was deeply moved by the girl's plea. He stood quietly for a moment, lost in thought, then slowly stepped closer to the grave and wished peace upon Jake's soul. He remained still before the grave, while Selina and the girl stood nearby in silence, watching him. Afterward, Ojin turned to the girl and sincerely apologized for the misunderstanding the villagers had toward Jake. Then, with a tone of seriousness and determination, he promised her that he would do everything he could to save Max, no matter what it took. Meanwhile, a group of soldiers arrived at the village earlier than expected to carry out their mission to kill the dog. Schwein was startled by their early appearance and pleaded with them to rest for the day and return tomorrow. But the soldiers responded coldly, saying their previous assignment had ended early and there was no reason to delay this one. The commander insisted they carry out the task immediately, telling Schwein sharply that there was no need to wait another day. He added indifferently that the villagers hated the dog anyway, so no one would complain if they killed it a day ahead of schedule. At that very moment, Max lay exhausted on the ground outside his cave. He appeared so weak and frail that he could barely move, while the soldiers began preparing for the kill. Ojin and Selena entered Jake's house, hoping to find something that might help them reach the dog. Upon entering, Ojin was struck by the strong scent of medicinal herbs, leading him to wonder if Jake had been an herbal healer. He looked around with growing interest, searching for anything that might assist in calming Max. Selena suggested they take something with Jake's scent on it. Perhaps it could help soothe the dog, then began gathering some of Jake's clothes hanging on the wall. At that moment, Ojin noticed a framed photo resting on a table. It showed Jake and Max together, both smiling with deep affection, and the image stirred powerful emotions in him. He stood there, eyes fixed on the photo, wondering how someone who had cared so deeply for his dog could meet such a tragic fate. Selena pointed out that Jake seemed to have been searching for the mandrake plant, which left Ojin confused. She clarified what she meant by pointing to a wall-hanging image of the mandrake. Ojin stepped closer to the image, puzzled, and asked about the plant, mentioning that he might have seen something similar in a movie. Selena replied that the mandrake was known for its piercing scream when uprooted. She added that it was a rare and extremely difficult plant to find, and every herbalist dreamed of discovering one due to its immense value. At that same time, Max sat outside his cave under a dark, clouded sky. Though he looked slightly better, he was still panting quietly and clearly fatigued. The scene shifts into a flashback. Rain begins pouring down suddenly, and Jake rushes toward the cave with Max to shelter from the storm, remarking on how unexpectedly heavy the rainfall was. Inside, Jake sat beside a small fire he had started for warmth, deciding to wait until the rain stopped before leaving. He noticed Max shivering from the cold, so he pulled something from his bag that he had prepared for just such moments. He wrapped the blanket around Max gently, telling him that he'd catch a cold if he stayed wet, and asked him to stay still for a bit. But Max began playfully squirming, bringing a smile to Jake's face as he laughed and called him a little rascal. Jake smiled gratefully, feeling lucky that they had found this cave to wait out the storm. At that moment, Jake spotted something strange and shiny on the cave floor, which caught him off guard. He hadn't known there was even a cave here. He moved in for a closer look and was stunned to discover a mandrake plant. Jake stared at the plant intently, excitement lighting up his face as he confirmed to himself that the shape and color of the leaves indeed matched those of the mandrake. Overwhelmed with joy, he exclaimed that he never imagined he'd actually see such a plant in real life, outside the pages of books. Filled with enthusiasm, he decided to rush back home to fetch his tools so he could properly extract the plant. He told Max he'd be back quickly. Max, sensing Jake was leaving, let out a sad whimper, clearly anxious about being left alone. Jake tried to comfort him gently, assuring him he wouldn't be gone long, and asked him to stay put. He promised Max he'd return soon and told him to wait inside the cave. With a cheerful smile, Jake stepped out, believing this was his lucky day. Max remained alone in the cave as heavy rain poured down outside, waiting patiently for his owner's return. Outside, Jake hurried through the storm, making his way toward home to grab his tools. The rainfall grew heavier as Jake pushed forward, determined. Suddenly he heard a terrifying rumble, the sound of earth shifting, which made him freeze and look around in fear. Panic overtook his face as he realized the danger unfolding around him. A landslide, triggered by the relentless rain, crashed down suddenly, burying everything in its path, and it was this disaster that claimed Jake's life. Time passed, the fire in the cave went out, and Max remained seated inside, unaware of what had happened to his beloved owner. He continued to wait alone, sorrow written all over him, while outside the skies cleared and a rainbow appeared on the horizon. A week later, some hikers passed by the cave and were startled to see a dog sitting alone inside, still waiting. As they approached, they clearly saw how thin and abandoned the dog looked. Feeling sorry for him, one of them suggested they give him something to eat. But when one of the men moved toward Max with food, the dog suddenly became aggressively defensive. He bared his teeth and growled menacingly. Startled, the two men recoiled in fear. One wondered aloud why the dog reacted so violently, while the other warned they should leave the area immediately. They quickly left, muttering in fear and frustration that the dog's aggression made it obvious why his owner had abandoned him. Max, now alone again, returned to the same spot inside the cave, continuing to wait faithfully for Jake's return. Back in the present, Max suddenly raised his head upon hearing footsteps approaching in the night. A group of people with rifles was heading toward the cave. Schwein nervously suggested that it was late, and there was no rush. They should rest instead. But the soldiers continued moving forward, and soon reached Max's location. The dog was clearly agitated and braced himself defensively. One soldier asked his companion if they had enough tranquilizer darts, and the other replied confidently that they had brought enough. After all, they knew they were dealing with a dangerous shaman breed. Schwein approached them in a panic, begging them to give him just one more hour because he had hired someone to help save the dog. He tried to convince the commander, telling him the dog had a story and had never harmed anyone before. But the commander coldly replied that they weren't there to listen to sad stories about a dog. He added that regardless of how touching the story might be, their job was to protect the citizens. And with that, he raised his weapon and aimed it at Max. Max, confused and scared, panted anxiously as the soldier prepared to shoot. But at the last second, a hand grabbed the rifle and stopped him. It was Ojin, hooded and calm, telling the commander that he was being far too hasty. Ojin explained firmly that the dog could still be saved and asked them to wait a little longer. He looked at Max with compassion and called him gently by name. Max. Raising his hand slowly, Ojin smiled warmly and told him that he had waited a long time. Max's tail began to move slowly, then started wagging faster and faster as joy overwhelmed him. He barked excitedly, his face glowing with happiness upon seeing Ojin. The dog ran toward him, barking cheerfully with all his energy. Ojin knelt and embraced Max gently, whispering with quiet sorrow that he was deeply sorry, for he wasn't the one Max had been waiting for all this time. On a moonlit night, a small deer appeared, running frantically through the forest, panting from exhaustion. The deer kept running, gasping from extreme fatigue and stress, as if trying to escape from something chasing it. Suddenly, a large yellow eye appeared in the darkness, watching the deer with anticipation. A loud scream echoed, and a large number of birds flew into the sky in terror. The next morning, Ojin heard a woman screaming inside his clinic, calling for help. "Doctor, help me! My child can't move!" Ojin was shocked and bewildered when he saw the sick animal, exclaiming in disbelief, "This is unbelievable." The animal was a creature resembling a hamster named Bing Bing, and Ojin saw that it was so overweight it couldn't move. Bing Bing's owner began to cry, claiming that Bing Bing had become very weak recently and was barely eating just 5 meals a day. Ojin replied seriously that Bing Bing could become seriously ill if he didn't lose the excess weight. After that client, Schwein suddenly entered the clinic with a smile and asked Ojin if he was all right. It turned out that Max the dog had come down from the mountain into the village, but he had spent a long time unable to understand that his owner had died, still sitting beside the grave. Thanks to Schwein's continued care, Max was finally able to open up to him and accept him as a new friend. Ojin asked Schwein if there was a problem with Max, but Schwein told him that wasn't the reason he came. Schwein and his companions placed a large box on the table and said they came because of this thing. Inside the box was a mandrake plant, which astonished Ojin. Selena explained that it was strange for the mandrake's roots to be above the soil, as they are usually buried deep underground. It turned out that Jake, the deceased, was the one who discovered the plant, and they decided to keep it as a memento of him. But as soon as they placed the plant in the pot, it jumped out of the soil in this bizarre way. Schwein added that the bigger problem was that the plant wouldn't stop screaming all day and night, and even when they buried it, it would jump out and start screaming again. He also told them that no one could live without earplugs due to the constant screaming, and some people's eardrums had even burst from the volume. Selena said she had heard of such cases, where some mandrake plants are very sensitive to their environment, and it seemed this plant hated the environment it had been placed in. Schwein continued, saying that dealing with the plant had become a nightmare, and that while it was currently asleep, once it woke up, chaos would break out. Schwein begged Ojin to take the plant, which greatly shocked Ojin. Ojin strongly refused, saying he dealt with animals, not plants, and sarcastically added that anything that screamed like that couldn't be just a plant. Schwein, panicked, said nervously that if it wasn't a plant or an animal, it must be a monster, or maybe a demon. Ojin sarcastically suggested that he take it to a church instead of his clinic. Suddenly, the plant began to wake up slowly, which terrified Schwein, who shouted that the demon was awakening. Schwein and his companions ran off quickly, leaving the plant with Ojin, who was furious that they had abandoned it in the clinic and fled like that. Ojin shouted angrily that he had seen people abandon animals before, but this was the first time he'd seen someone abandon a plant, while Selena coldly commented, "Wonderful." Selena calmly explained that the mandrake was a rare and highly valuable plant. Not just its leaves and stems, but even its roots could be used to save the lives of people who were on the verge of death. Ojin stood beside Selena as they looked at the mandrake plant, and he wondered in confusion what the point of the plant was if they couldn't control it. Selena noticed that the plant was beginning to wake up, and she quickly warned Ojin to cover his ears so his eardrums wouldn't be damaged by its scream. The plant began slowly opening its eyes, taking a deep breath in preparation to scream, which made Ojin anxious. Ojin tightly covered his ears, wishing he had his noise-canceling headphones, which he was still paying off from his previous world. But when Ojin looked at the plant, he was surprised to find it looking extremely gentle, gazing at him with a warm, admiring expression. Selena asked in surprise what was going on, then told Ojin that the plant seemed to like him a lot. She paused to think, then asked Ojin to take out the pendant he had received before, as a certain idea came to her mind. When Ojin pulled out the pendant, the plant became very excited and began screaming joyfully, in a very sweet way. Ojin was shocked to see the plant dancing with extreme happiness, bewildered by its strange behavior. He recalled the dancing sunflower toy at his friend's house, and felt that the sight in front of him was oddly disturbing. Selena silently watched the scene, without commenting on the plant's strange behavior. Selena suggested that Ojin keep the plant in his room, but Ojin objected in surprise, saying he had never raised a plant before. Night fell, and the house was quiet, and everything seemed to be in order. Ojin suddenly woke up from his sleep due to loud, repeated knocking on his door. He opened the door, still half asleep, and told the person that night visits cost 30% more. The woman at the door pleaded anxiously, saying her little one was in critical condition and needed urgent help. Ojin was shocked when he saw the injured creature, a winged puppy with deep, heavily bleeding wounds. Selena mentioned that mandrake leaves had a powerful property that could stop bleeding quickly. When Selena went to fetch one of the plant's leaves, she was surprised to find the mandrake staring at her with confusion and disapproval. Selena suggested that Ojin ask the plant himself, which left him baffled by the strange idea. Ojin felt nervous and hesitant as he tried to speak to the plant, urgently asking for a single leaf. The plant kindly agreed and seemed extremely shy as it handed Ojin one of its leaves. The plant began singing gently and happily while giving the leaf, which only added to Ojin's confusion and amazement. The bleeding stopped immediately after using the leaf, leaving Ojin astonished by its powerful effect. The small puppy looked relieved and happy after the bleeding stopped, and it began to visibly recover. The puppy's owner felt great gratitude toward Ojin, and he told her that the pup would need extra care for a while. After that incident, Ojin felt extremely tired and began yawning, declaring that he could finally go back to sleep. But only half an hour later, the knocking on the door returned, making Ojin feel deeply frustrated. Another woman was at the door, crying out for help because her little one was dying. When Ojin saw the injured animal, he and Selena realized it was a young deer, and the wound was almost identical to that of the previous puppy, indicating that the same monster had attacked it. Ojin carefully examined the young deer's wounds and realized that these injuries weren't the result of a typical hunting attack. He said with concern that the wounds looked as if the attacker had been toying with the animals, torturing them for fun. The village women were confused by the term psychopath that Ojin used, asking if it was a new kind of monster. Ojin replied with an awkward smile that it was something similar. Suddenly, an elderly woman shouted that she knew the identity of the attacker, and she seemed absolutely terrified as she said it. The woman revealed the attacker to be Baron Doyle's pet wolf, and the Baron appeared with a sly smile on his face beside his fearsome wolf. The woman tearfully explained that the Baron roamed the forest with his wolf, amusing himself by torturing weak animals. Ojin burst out in rage, asking how such a madman could be allowed to do this without any laws protecting animals. Selena replied calmly that it was because he was a noble. Ojin felt deep frustration and began shouting in anger about the feudal society, calling for law and democracy. But Selena didn't understand the word democracy and reminded him that the priority now was to treat the injured animal. 1 week later, the sound of knocking returned during the night, and people began shouting for Ojin's help again. Ojin exploded in frustration, loudly declaring that he could no longer tolerate this difficult and repetitive situation. He decided to start a revolution against the noble class, and marched with the villagers toward the Baron's castle, carrying torches and demanding protection for animals. The villagers stood before the castle, shouting for the Baron to stop the violence against animals and ensure their safety. Ojin led the group, raising his voice forcefully, demanding that the Baron immediately stop the cruelty. At that moment, the Baron's private guards appeared at the castle gates, causing tension and worry among everyone. The commander of the guards stepped forward and asked in a firm voice for Kim Ojin, making Ojin nervous, thinking they had found out he was the leader of the revolt. Ojin was surprised when the guards bowed respectfully to him instead of attacking. The commander told Ojin that they were to escort him into the castle by request of the Baron himself. When Ojin entered the castle, he found the Baron's wolf lying on the ground, seriously injured and unconscious. The Baron was crying and begging Ojin to help his wolf Magma, promising to give him anything he wanted in return for saving him. Ojin and Selena looked in shock at the wounded wolf, unable to believe what they were seeing. The next morning, rumors spread among the villagers about a dangerous magical creature appearing in the western forest, and that the Baron's wolf had been killed because of it. The villagers spoke in great fear about the mysterious beast, with some describing it as a giant man-eating creature. Panic began to spread rapidly among the people, and some even decided to flee the village out of fear of the monster. At that time, a man stepped forward to calm the people, announcing that the Baron had already begun a large-scale operation to eliminate the monster. Soldiers were deployed in the forest to capture the beast, and the Baron declared that his troops were watching the forest day and night. The villagers praised the Baron for securing the village and feeding them, while Ojin listened with anger and irritation at the exaggerated praise. Ojin burned with frustration, recalling that everything the Baron had done only stirred up more problems, and placed the blame on others. He watched as people cheered for the Baron as a hero, and he bitterly realized how easily public opinion could be manipulated in this society. Selena noticed Ojin's state and said he seemed worried, asking what he was thinking about. Ojin confirmed his suspicions to Selena, telling her that most of the injured animals that came to his clinic had been attacked in the eastern forest near the village. Ojin carefully studied the map and pointed out that the location where Baron's wolf Magma was attacked was completely different from the places where the other animals were attacked. It had happened deep in the western forest, far from the village. Meanwhile, the Baron's soldiers were carrying out a large-scale operation in the western forest to search for the monster responsible for the attack. Ojin wondered aloud, saying it made sense to focus on the site of the most recent attack, but he was puzzled by the lack of attention given to the eastern forest, where most of the attacks had occurred. Selena agreed with Ojin, saying the situation was indeed strange and suspicious, adding that villagers usually didn't go to the western forest. When Ojin asked why people avoided the western forest, Selena explained it was because of the terrifying ghost stories that surrounded that area. Ojin asked curiously what those stories were about, but before Selena could answer, a man from inside a shop called the Glass House called them in, saying they had been waiting for a long time. When they entered, the man revealed the tools Ojin had previously ordered, handmade glass syringes. The craftsman explained in detail how these syringes had been specially made to resist heat and impact, with needles made from a blend of gold and steel. Ojin was thrilled and deeply impressed by the tools, expressing his amazement at their precision and high quality. The craftsman apologized, saying he wouldn't be able to make them again due to the difficulty of production, but Ojin quickly convinced him with a generous financial offer, which the craftsman eagerly accepted. Ojin shook the craftsman's hand, confirming the beginning of a new partnership between them. Among the items that also arrived for Ojin were a bottle of nutritional solution, a measuring device, and a medical animal cage made of birchwood. After that, Ojin showed Selena his plan to renovate the interior of his clinic, which included a modern and organized layout of the rooms. Selena expressed her admiration for the idea, saying she had never thought of organizing the rooms that way. At that moment, someone entered the room announcing the arrival of a shipment of medicinal herbs they had ordered earlier. Ojin was surprised by the large quantities of herbs being brought in and asked in confusion about all of it. Selena explained the benefits of some of the medicinal herbs, such as Lunas flora, which helps induce sleep when properly ground and inhaled. She then explained the effects of other herbs like painkillers and healing plants, which left Ojin both surprised and impressed. As Ojin read the medical book, he was shocked by the benefits of some herbs that could treat serious illnesses he had never heard of in his original world, such as cancer and dementia. Ojin felt deeply embarrassed by his ignorance and begged Selena to teach him more about these herbs, while Selena teased him gently. Suddenly, a woman burst into the room, shouting that the monster had finally been captured. Ojin and Selena were stunned by the unexpected news. Meanwhile, in the forest, soldiers led by the Baron advanced with torches, as terrifying sounds from the monster echoed through the area. Ojin appeared very surprised and tense because of the loud, frightening sound coming from the forest. The monster's roar was so loud and terrifying that Ojin compared it to the cry of a massive dragon. The creature managed to destroy the traps set for it, and the soldiers intensified their chase. The soldiers ran after the hunting dogs, trying to corner the monster within the forest. Ojin stared into the mysterious shadow, wondering if it was the monster itself. When the soldiers and Ojin reached the creature's location, the surprise was shocking. It turned out that the terrifying beast that had scared everyone was just a small black cat that looked frightened and nervous. Everyone stood in silence and astonishment before the little cat, who was trying to act tough by making loud noises, despite its tiny size. One of the soldiers approached the Baron and said in confusion that the animal looked like an ordinary stray cat, no matter how closely he examined it. But the Baron responded angrily, insisting that he was absolutely certain this cat was the monster that attacked his wolf, Magma, and urged the soldier to look at how terrified the wolf appeared. At that moment, the wolf Magma appeared, trembling with fear and making weak, terrified noises. The small cat began to bare its fangs and claws, growling loudly and aggressively, despite its noticeable trembling. Ojin watched the scene and immediately realized it resembled bullying, where the small cat seemed to be the victim of unfair targeting and injustice. A soldier was ordered to throw a net over the small cat, and they managed to catch it despite its fierce resistance. A large soldier brought heavy iron chains and began preparing to restrain the cat with them, which shocked and worried Ojin, who whispered to himself, begging them to stop. The soldiers bound the cat with both the net and the chains, laughing as they enjoyed its suffering. Suddenly, the Baron ordered the soldiers to burn the cat immediately, causing Ojin to scream in horror, fiercely protesting what was happening. But the Baron smiled wickedly and said it would be better to take it alive and execute it publicly as an example to others. The soldiers burst out laughing mockingly while Ojin stared at them in disbelief and deep anger, realizing they were clearly enjoying the torture of animals. Ojin recalled a similar moment from his past, remembering how this kind of cruelty was the thing he hated most in the world, which only increased his rage and disgust at what was unfolding. He also remembered an injured animal he once cared for, after a woman who used to feed it told him the animal had gone missing for a long time, before returning badly wounded, which made him feel sadness and pain. When Ojin saw the injured animal back then, he immediately realized the wounds weren't accidental, but the work of someone deliberately harming animals. In that memory, Ojin lost his temper and called those people demons, as they were among the humans he hated the most. Back in the present, the soldiers noticed the small cat beginning to tear through the net it was bound in, and they called on each other to quickly grab it again. Suddenly, Ojin shouted loudly, "Stop! Cover your noses and mouths, all of you," which left everyone stunned. The Baron and the soldiers turned to Ojin in confusion, trying to understand the reason for his strange and sudden command. Ojin pointed in feigned fear at the small cat, shouting that the mark on its forehead was clearly a demonic symbol. The Baron and Selena looked confused, repeating Ojin's words nervously. A demonic symbol? Still not grasping what he meant. Ojin continued speaking with great enthusiasm, explaining that the mark on the cat's forehead was clearly the letter M, which was the symbol of a great demon that spreads global plagues. Ojin shouted with feigned panic and excitement, explaining that this mark was the symbol of the demon Goksona, responsible for the great pandemic. Ojin began explaining details about the small cat, saying that the mark on its forehead was the symbol of the demon Goksona, who is responsible for the spread of a major plague. This statement surprised and shocked the Baron and the soldiers, who asked in confusion what Goksona was. Ojin continued explaining, saying that the plague began in the past with a small rat that served the demon. He then added that the small cat had swallowed the plague-infected rats and absorbed their magic, which made it a stronger carrier of the plague. He also explained that the cat had thus become a dangerous creature, carrying a plague far more powerful than the rats, and that it had suddenly appeared in this land. Ojin's face was extremely serious, as he confirmed that this plague is called Gorona, and once it starts spreading, it will wipe out half the population of the region. The soldiers refused to believe Ojin's words and began grumbling, saying they had never heard anything like this before, and they thought he was mocking them. But the Baron suddenly stopped them and asked them to wait a little to clarify the matter. The Baron asked Ojin seriously, and with clear tension, if what he was saying was really true. Ojin confidently confirmed that it was true, and that this plague had actually occurred in the place where he used to live. Ojin continued his explanation, saying that in order to defeat this demon, all of humanity had to wage war against it, using medical masks and various medicines. The soldiers were still hesitant, so they asked again if the cat was truly the demon's servant, and Ojin replied decisively and firmly, yes. Ojin continued that even so, the cat is still young, and they can control it, assuring them that they had managed to develop a cure in the place he came from, and that they could do the same here. Ojin looked at Selena, asking for her confirmation, and his gaze pleaded deeply for her support. Ojin secretly and anxiously asked Selena to support him and confirm his words in front of everyone. Very calmly, Selena confirmed that what Ojin was saying was possible, and if they used the cat's blood with the right herbs, they could make a cure for the plague. Silence and tension filled the place, and Ojin began to feel anxious, wondering internally whether he had exaggerated his story and what would happen if his plan failed. The leader of the soldiers began to object to Ojin's words, saying this story was far too ridiculous to believe, but the Baron immediately interrupted him angrily, demanding he be silent. The Baron spoke to Ojin calmly and told him he would give him 1 week to treat the creature and bring it to the castle, after which they would execute it publicly before everyone. Ojin breathed a sigh of relief and felt great comfort after successfully overcoming the difficult situation. After that, Ojin thanked Selena for her help and jokingly said she was better at lying than he expected, to which Selena coldly replied that she didn't lie. Ojin was surprised by Selena's words and anxiously explained to her that he had made up the story from his imagination, but Selena calmly confirmed that it was indeed possible to create a cure from the cat's blood with mandrake plant. However, she added with a serious tone that they would need to grind hundreds of mandrake plants to make the cure, which terrified the small plant sitting with them in the room. Selena looked toward Ojin and asked him in confusion why he even wanted to save this animal in the first place. At that time, the cat was lying on a small bed under sedation, and Selena explained that it was calm for now, but once it woke up, dealing with it would be much harder than they expected. Ojin stood in thought and explained to Selena confidently that this cat was not the animal that had attacked the other animals in the village. Ojin pulled out detailed records he had collected about the infected animals in the village and said that the wounds on those animals were similar in size and shape. He then pointed to the record of the Baron's wolf, Magma, and said that its injuries were completely different from those of the other animals. He then explained precisely that the size and shape of the claws and the severity of the wounds in Magma's case were entirely different, which meant the attacking creature was completely different from the one that attacked the other animals. Selena read the reports carefully and told Ojin that she now clearly understood that the Baron's wolf, Magma, had been the one hurting the animals all along, while the small cat had only attacked the Baron's wolf. Ojin began thinking deeply and confirmed to Selena that there was something strange about what was happening. He then explained that Baron Doyle had been using his power and influence all along to hide the fact that his wolf Magma was the one attacking the other animals. So it was very strange that he suddenly changed his stance and directed the accusation toward another creature, launching a public hunt. Ojin then theorized that this massive campaign might just be a cover-up, and that the small cat was in fact the true target of the hunt. Selena agreed with Ojin's analysis, and said that this explains the Baron's attempt to capture the cat alive instead of killing it outright, and also explains how easily the Baron fell for Ojin's simple lie. Selena continued her analysis, and pointed out that the scar on the cat's forehead wasn't just an ordinary wound, and that there were many old injuries near the cat's legs as well, which made things even more suspicious. Ojin looked sadly at the small cat and said he would uncover the full truth about what had happened to it, no matter the cost. At that moment, Selena looked at Ojin and thought to herself that at first he had seemed like just a vet chasing money, but now she saw him as someone genuinely good. Suddenly, Ojin began acting strangely. He approached the sleeping cat and started sniffing it repeatedly with great excitement, then lifted it to his face and began praising its softness and warmth in a strange way, and kept sniffing it again in the same odd manner, which left Selena silent and stunned by what she was witnessing. Afterwards, Selena concluded to herself that he was actually just a madman, while the small mandrake plant in the background grew jealous of Ojin's attention to the cat. The next morning, strange and loud noises began coming from inside Ojin's clinic, which alarmed and puzzled the villagers, who wondered about the source of those eerie, frightening sounds they had never heard before. Some of the villagers began talking about Ojin, saying that he was battling a real demon in his clinic, and soon the news spread rapidly among the people that the vet Kim Ojin was purging a plague-spreading demon. The villagers started speaking with awe about Ojin, saying that he wasn't just an ordinary vet, but a powerful wizard from another world. In just moments, a crowd had gathered outside the clinic, cheering and hailing the great wizard Kim Ojin, while Ojin internally remarked that this is how public opinion is formed in the Middle Ages. Inside the clinic, Ojin was struggling to feed the small cat, but the cat fiercely refused and threw the food back into Ojin's face. Ojin shouted, commenting that this cat had a very difficult temper, while the cat began shrieking even more aggressively. Selena noticed something strange and told Ojin that the cat seemed smaller than it had been 3 days ago. Ojin confirmed her observation and said the cat's length had shrunk from 80 centimeters and 7 kilograms to just 60 centimeters and 5 kilograms, and Selena guessed that this was due to it losing its magical energy. But Ojin said it had nothing to do with magic or anything like that. The cat simply hadn't eaten anything for 3 whole days, and it had to eat. Ojin began explaining to Selena that the cat was stuck in a vicious cycle of anger and hunger, where its hunger caused it to become angry, and the anger consumed more energy, making it even hungrier. At that moment, Ojin remembered a type of snack for cats from his original world and wished he had one with him now to help the cat eat. Suddenly, Ojin felt a sharp pain in his chest and wondered what was causing it. Then he noticed that the pendant he had received from the dragon had begun to glow intensely. In mere moments, a strange object emerged from the pendant and headed toward him, shocking him deeply. It turned out that the strange object was the exact snack Ojin had been thinking about, and it had appeared from the pendant and opened itself in front of him in a very strange way. When the cat saw the snack, it let out a powerful cry and leapt toward it with great excitement. managing to grab it exactly in the middle of its body, which left Ojin stunned as he commented on the precision of the strike. The small cat began eating with clear appetite, making gentle sounds that indicated its great enjoyment of the food. Ojin felt immense joy as he fed the cat from the snack he had just received, affirming that he had finally found the right way to get it to eat. Selena looked at Ojin in astonishment as he spoke to the cat in a childish manner while feeding it. Then Ojin sat on the floor, holding the cat in his arms, enjoying the cat's happiness as it ate from his hand. Suddenly, Selena noticed something important on the cat's forehead, as the scar on its head began to glow strangely. Upon seeing the mark clearly, Selena realized the truth, and repeated to herself that she now understood everything. Everything now became completely clear to Selena as she watched the scene between Ojin and the small cat, saying to herself that it all made perfect sense. Selena came to an important conclusion, that this small creature before her was no ordinary cat at all. She recalled an ancient legend about a beast called Manhwa, or the horned lion. The legend says that in ancient times, when dragons vanished and the world overflowed with mana, these mythical creatures appeared and were considered sacred beings by the people. Wherever their horns touched the earth, blessings poured down, turning dry lands into fertile, water-rich areas. Dark places would become bright and full of life wherever these creatures passed. These miraculous blessings were possible due to the heart of the Manhwa, as their hearts had an extraordinary ability to produce mana. The horns on their foreheads were considered sacred channels through which mana energy flowed, and it was said that anyone who touched these horns would inevitably die. But over time, and with the global mana shortage, the number of Manhwa creatures declined dramatically. To protect themselves, these creatures began mimicking the forms of small animals. But even so, they never lost their pride and dignity as mythical beings. As a result, humans were never able to tame these creatures. The only being capable of approaching and taming them was the legendary spirit of healing. Meanwhile, Ojin was excessively celebrating the cat's successful use of the litter box. The cat, whom Ojin had named Kim Seonja, began responding to him playfully, making soft meowing sounds. Ojin continued enthusiastically praising the cat as he fed it again, while the cat kept eating voraciously. Selena watched this bizarre scene with a worried expression, wondering if what they were doing was truly right. At the same time, inside the Baron's castle, the Baron was shocked when one of his soldiers informed him that the cat had eaten calmly. The Baron received a report confirming that Ojin was holding the cat in his arms and feeding it happily, and that the cat was eating with appetite and making clear sounds of satisfaction. The Baron initially refused to believe it, telling the soldier that it was absolutely impossible, while the soldier explained that the troops were feeling anxious and uneasy about what was happening. The Baron began to have doubts about the true nature of the cat, wondering nervously if the creature was not just an ordinary feline, especially with all the rumors about the demon lion and the plague that Ojin had mentioned. The Baron recalled the fact that humans could never tame Manhwa creatures, and the danger they posed even after losing much of their power. He explained that the greater danger lay in these creatures' ability to transform the mana inside their bodies into toxins and deadly explosions, and that the entire nation could collapse due to the plague they might cause. The Baron remembered Ojin's words that a similar plague had actually happened in his original world, and that humans had to fight it for many years. He expressed deep astonishment as he thought aloud, saying he had heard before that Manhwa creatures never eat food offered by humans. Baron Doyle began to wonder about Ojin. Did that young man have a special method unknown to them that allowed him to tame that strange cat, which no one had been able to handle before? At Ojin's clinic, the assistant called for the next patient to enter. She welcomed the owner of a small creature called a pink fairy and asked her to proceed to the examination room. As the woman entered the room with her pet, the assistant greeted her with a smile and explained that the pet's weight would be measured inside. Meanwhile, Ojin watched the scene, pleased with the clinic's growing efficiency and order. A short while later, one of the clients complained about the annoying noise coming from a creature named Jinglebeat, which made constant sounds even while still. Selena rudely responded, threatening to use magic to silence the client herself, prompting Ojin to yell her name in frustration due to her poor treatment of the customers. After that, Selena began using force unnecessarily against another client who had cut in line, causing Ojin to shout at her again because of the violence she used inside the clinic. Later, Ojin was surprised when Selena suddenly walked out of the clinic during an examination, which made him cry out in confusion, demanding to know why she had left so abruptly. A few days earlier, Selena had left him a note in her beautiful handwriting, informing him she would be away for a few days, which deeply angered Ojin due to her frequent and unexplained absences. Ojin stood trembling with anger, holding Selena's note, grumbling loudly, and declaring that what she did was grounds for dismissal, remarking that even veterinarians themselves wouldn't act this way. Ojin was forced to urgently seek temporary help, turning to someone named Biu, who lived near the clinic, offering her a relatively high wage of 2 silver coins per hour, which delighted her greatly. Biu quickly proved herself to be highly skilled and excellent with clients. She warmly greeted one customer and politely asked him to leave his weapon with her before entering the clinic. She also showed great love for animals, expressing admiration for a small creature brought in by a child, and commented that she had raised a similar one when she was young. Additionally, Biu showed tremendous dedication and enthusiasm for her work, eagerly asking Ojin for permission to help organize the files, which impressed him. Ojin grew increasingly excited by Biu's energy and commitment, to the point that he seriously began considering hiring her full-time. Shortly after, Ojin noticed the clinic was unusually quiet, which puzzled him and made him wonder about the sudden calm. The clinic was usually bustling with clients and animals, but on that specific day it was strangely quiet, which added to Oh-jin's confusion. Typically, the clinic was filled with noise from barking and animals fighting each other constantly, but today everything was eerily calm. Oh-jin stood in the middle of the clinic, wondering about the sudden silence, as the animals stared at him with suspicious stillness. The reason was the small black cat, Seonja, who had emitted a very intimidating aura that terrified all the animals present. Outside, the clinic's operations continued, and Bayu once again called for the next patient to come in. Oh-jin was surprised to see that the next patient entering the examination room was the same creature Bing Bing, who had visited the clinic earlier, but was now strangely overweight. Oh-jin stared at Bing Bing in disbelief, wondering how such a small hamster could become this large, joking with the creature, and saying it now looked like a panda. The pet's owner responded in confusion, saying it wasn't a hamster, but a creature called a flow bear, which made Oh-jin feel embarrassed by his mistake. The owner clarified to Oh-jin, visibly concerned, that it was a flow bear, and not a hamster as the doctor had said, which reminded Oh-jin that people in this world don't call it a hamster. The owner then asked Oh-jin if he even knew what a flow bear was, which increased Oh-jin's embarrassment as he nervously tried to deny his ignorance. Suddenly, Bu jumped in with great enthusiasm and said that Dr. Oh-jin came from another world, which is why he used different terms, further confusing and worrying Oh-jin with her odd comment. Bayu continued explaining excitedly, saying that Oh-jin could diagnose diseases that other doctors here couldn't understand because of his experience from another world, while Oh-jin stood there flustered by her strange explanation. Finally, Oh-jin was deeply impressed by Bu's enthusiasm and dedication, and he decided to hire her permanently, enthusiastically announcing to everyone that she was now a full-time employee. Oh-jin then returned to examining Bing Bing, once again wondering how the creature had grown so large despite appearing in very good health. He examined the creature carefully, confirming that its anatomy matched that of a hamster despite the different color, and speculated whether it had been exposed to a special kind of magic that made it grow so big, while the small black cat quietly observed the situation. The black cat, Seonja, began to stare menacingly at the small creature, Bing Bing. Suddenly, Seonja leapt at the small animal with incredible speed to attack it, while Oh-jin screamed its name, trying to stop it. Oh-jin shouted again, trying to prevent Seonja from attacking, reaching out his hand and pleading for it not to do it. As a result of the sudden attack, the small animal was launched into the air and split into 3 equal parts, in a strange and astonishing manner. Everyone in the room was shocked by what happened, with Oh-jin and the others crying out in disbelief as the small creature suddenly split into 3. Oh-jin was in a state of shock, holding his head and shouting in confusion about how this crazy world could ignore the laws of physics like that, saying he couldn't explain this phenomenon as a doctor. The animal's owner approached Oh-jin and told him that his Bing Bing had split into 3, and Oh-jin stammered, trying to explain the situation but unsure of what to say. But the owner soon became incredibly happy when he realized he now had 3 creatures instead of 1, embracing the 3 animals joyfully, while Oh-jin wondered in disbelief how he could actually love this outcome. The man rejoiced as he hugged the 3 small creatures with excitement and began thinking of suitable names for them. But suddenly, one of the little creatures jumped away and started running, causing panic and shouting inside the clinic. The 3 tiny animals began darting in all directions at high speed, and everyone screamed in amazement at how fast they had become after shrinking in size. Oh-jin struggled to catch the little creatures, and eventually, someone managed to grab them one by one. It was Selena who did so. She stood holding the 3 animals and said that this creature was not a flow bear, which surprised Oh-jin. She then explained that this creature was actually something called a bloop, and asked in confusion where they had gotten it from. The animal's owner replied that he didn't know exactly, but had received it as a gift from his father, then nervously asked if his creature was demonic. Selena immediately ordered that the 3 creatures be placed under medical observation in the clinic, which surprised everyone due to the sudden decision. When she noticed the owner's concern, Selena calmly reassured him, saying she had no intention of dissecting or harming them. Then Oh-jin joined in to comfort the owner, saying that they do not perform any unethical medical procedures, and assured him that nothing would be done without his consent. Later, Selena began explaining to Oh-jin that bloop creatures are not naturally occurring animals in the world. She added that these creatures were, in fact, the result of experiments conducted by a mad wizard. Oh-jin was greatly shocked by this, and asked in disbelief if there were mad scientists in this world too, like in his previous one. Selena continued, saying that the wizard wasn't actually all that evil, but that didn't excuse the mistakes he had made. She added in a low voice that she had thought the bloop creatures had disappeared completely long ago, and never expected to see them in a place like this. Selena began to wonder aloud whether it had really been 100 years since she last saw such creatures, which prompted Oh-jin to shout in surprise, questioning her real age. Suddenly the cat, Seonja, began growling and snarling angrily, and Oh-jin asked in concern what was wrong, and why it had suddenly become so enraged. At that moment, someone began pounding on the clinic door forcefully, shouting Oh-jin's name, and demanding he open the door immediately. Oh-jin and Selena turned toward the door in shock and anticipation at the sudden banging. When the door opened, it turned out to be Baron Doyle, who appeared furious and grim-faced, accompanied by his personal guards. Baron Doyle shouted loudly and angrily, demanding that the beast be brought to him immediately. Meanwhile, Oh-jin recalled to himself that he had been so preoccupied trying to feed the stubborn cat that he hadn't properly prepared for such a difficult confrontation. Oh-jin tried to appear calm as he welcomed Baron Doyle, while deep inside, he was extremely anxious, wondering where Selena had disappeared to at such a critical moment. Ojin offered the Baron a cup of tea in an attempt to buy some time, but the Baron stubbornly refused and ordered him to bring the beast immediately, which made Ojin panic as the treatment was not yet complete. The soldier standing behind the Baron began shouting angrily, accusing Ojin of lying and stalling, insisting that the 1-week deadline they had given him had already passed. Ojin tried to escape the awkward situation and nervously told the Baron that a small issue had occurred during the treatment, which piqued the Baron's curiosity. Ojin explained with exaggerated dramatics that while he was exorcising the evil spirit from the cat, a mysterious bond had formed between him and the cat, which surprised the Baron and made him question further. Ojin continued his explanation, saying they were now linked to each other and could never be separated, while trying to maintain a calm smile despite his tension. But the soldiers quickly grew furious with this strange story, shouting at Ojin and calling him insane, making him realize his plan had not worked as he hoped. Ojin decided to confront the issue directly and asked the Baron with grave seriousness why he was keeping another black cat, identical to the one with him, locked up in a cell in his castle. The Baron was stunned by this question and became nervous and confused, wondering how Ojin had learned about such a secret. Ojin openly accused the Baron of planning to switch the two cats and execute the innocent one instead of the real culprit, which triggered a wave of anger and confusion in the Baron. Ojin revealed the full truth to the Baron, firmly stating that the creature attacking the animals in the village wasn't the small black cat, Seonja, but the Baron's wolf, Magma. The Baron shouted furiously, accusing Ojin of lying and demanded proof, asking if he had any evidence for his claims. At that moment, Ojin raised a medical file he had prepared in advance, proving that the wounds on the village animals matched the claws of the wolf Magma, and told the Baron this was his proof. But shockingly, one of the soldiers suddenly snatched the file from Ojin's hands and tore it apart in front of everyone. The soldier stood mockingly, ridiculing how the evidence had disappeared so easily, while Ojin felt deeply frustrated and angry over the loss of his proof. Then the furious soldier shoved Ojin aside and tried to grab the cage containing the small black cat, Seonja. But the cat viciously scratched the soldier's hand, making him scream in pain and curse the cat angrily. Ojin began thinking quickly about how to save the cat and considered summoning a steel cage for protection, but realized doing so would confirm their accusation that he was indeed a sorcerer. He then thought about summoning a firearm to resolve the situation by force, but quickly dismissed the idea for fear that it would cause a massacre inside the clinic. In a moment of intense stress, Ojin grabbed the magical pendant he had received from the dragon and decided he would use it if necessary. Suddenly, everyone heard a calm voice telling them to wait a moment. Everyone turned toward the source of the voice and saw a group of people in distinctive attire standing at the door, with their leader commanding everyone to step back immediately. The Baron looked extremely surprised as he stared at the group's leader, as if he knew him well or had just recognized him. The Baron's gaze focused on the staff the leader was holding, instantly recognizing the world tree insignia carved into it. Then he noticed the magical ring clearly glowing on the leader's forehead, which deeply astonished him. One of the soldiers standing next to the Baron shouted in shock that this man was the head of the High Inspection Agency of the Western Continent, known as Kalyan, of the Etherian Order. The Baron became flustered and attempted to greet the newcomers awkwardly, but ended up insulting them by describing the place as shabby and unfit for someone of their status. Kalyan ignored the insult and calmly explained that they had come because they received a report about a rare and endangered divine beast being discovered in this area. Ojin watched Kalyan with great awe and amazement, mentally comparing him to famous elf characters from movies he used to watch, thinking he looked just like Legolas from a certain film. At that moment, Ojin finally understood the real reason for Selena's sudden disappearance and realized she had been absent over the past few days to bring these important people to the clinic. Ojin suddenly paused, deep in thought, as his expression shifted to reveal that he had noticed something important for the first time. He suddenly recalled that Selena's ears were noticeably long, something he hadn't paid attention to before, and was shocked to realize that she might be of elven descent. Meanwhile, Kalyan quietly cast a special spell, murmuring an arcane incantation, while the small cat, Seonja, let out a low, uncomfortable sound. Seonja began to grow sleepy, slowly showing signs of surrender under the effect of Kalyan's enchantment surrounding him. Then the cat's body began to float gently from within the cage it had been held in, levitating in the air, surrounded by a magical aura. Kalyan spoke calmly, telling those around him that this creature was definitely a Monoceros, just as Selena had told them earlier. He pointed to the wound on Seonja's forehead, explaining that its shape closely resembled a cross-section of a world tree branch. He then explained seriously that this mark was definitely caused by a mana extraction device. Kalyan's expression shifted into something frightening as he stated that someone had forcibly extracted mana from this sacred creature, one of the last remaining of its kind in the world. Suddenly, Kalyan called out sharply and angrily to Baron Doyle, causing the Baron to visibly tremble and respond in panic. Kalyan then strode toward the Baron with intense fury, demanding to know if he was the one who had cut off the horn of this small creature. The Baron cried out in tears, vehemently denying that he had done such a thing, insisting he would never do anything like that. Kalyan shouted again in a rage, demanding to know who the real culprit was if not the Baron, which caused the Baron to scream in even greater fear. Terrified, the Baron began running away, shouting for help from anyone, swearing that he truly didn't know who the culprit was. At that moment, Ojin felt a rush of joy and commented to himself in astonishment that animal protection organizations in this world seemed to wield more power than nobles themselves. Kalyan then spoke calmly, explaining that there weren't many weapons in this world capable of cutting a divine beast's horn, and that a simple investigation would be enough to uncover the truth. He then thanked Ojin, telling him that it was thanks to his help that they were able to protect this precious divine creature. Ojin tried to respond humbly, saying that what he had done wasn't anything significant. After that, Kalyan told Ojin that they would be taking the small creature and caring for it, which left Ojin a bit surprised. Ojin looked at the small cat, Seonja, floating gently in the air, with sadness and reflection, realizing that it was being taken from them permanently. Suddenly, tension appeared on the faces of Kalyan's assistants, as they noticed the cat was breaking free from the spell and trying to shatter the barrier with its own power. Seonja suddenly leapt out of the enchantment with a loud cry, startling everyone in the room. The cat quickly dashed toward Ojin, who received it with great joy and excitement, calling its name with enthusiasm. Ojin embraced Seonja warmly, laughing with overwhelming happiness, while the cat purred in satisfaction and joy at returning to him. Kalyan and his assistants were stunned, in total disbelief at what they had just witnessed, and Kalyan asked aloud how something like this could happen with a monoceros. At that moment, the magical pendant around Ojin's neck suddenly began to glow with a powerful light, catching everyone's attention in the room. Kalyan stared intently at the pendant, then began to speak quietly, saying that this pendant might be the reason behind what just happened. Ojin looked slightly confused as he held the cat in his arms, while Kalyan and his assistants spoke quietly among themselves, exchanging glances. Suddenly, Ojin noticed the strange looks appearing in the eyes of Kalyan and his aides, which made him feel tense and uneasy. It reminded him of the exact same look one of his university professors used to give him when trying to persuade him to pursue graduate studies, and he felt a deep fear that they might be thinking of something similar now. At that moment, Selena joined the group and began whispering with Kalyan and his assistants, which only deepened Ojin's suspicions and heightened his anxiety. Kalyan began speaking gently to Ojin, telling him that he would entrust the care of the small creature, Seonja, to him. He then continued, saying that it would normally be better to take both of them to the main headquarters for a full investigation. But he added that since Selena was with Ojin, he felt reassured enough to leave Seonja in his care, which greatly surprised Ojin. Selena's reaction appeared completely indifferent, which angered and confused Ojin due to her apparent lack of concern. Kalyan then used a special kind of magic, speaking an arcane incantation that noticeably changed the atmosphere in the room. He summoned a special magical pendant and placed it around Seonja's neck, surprising Ojin. Kalyan explained to Ojin that the pendant was enchanted with powerful protective magic from the Etherian Order. Ojin was overjoyed to hear that the pendant would help Seonja regain strength in place of his lost horn, and he happily showed his delight to the cat. Kalyan added that if the cat were ever in danger, the pendant would immediately send an emergency signal to them, which made Ojin feel like he'd just been handed an advanced auto-rescue system. Kalyan then told Ojin they wanted to give him something else as a token of gratitude for everything he had done, which left Ojin surprised and eagerly wondering what it would be. Kalyan presented Ojin with a valuable ring, telling him it carried the authority of the Celestial House, which left Ojin confused. Ojin felt deeply uneasy as he held the ring, wondering if wearing it would get him entangled in dangerous or undesirable responsibilities. Kalyan gave a very gentle smile and explained that the ring also had the same protective magic as the pendant, and that it too would send a distress signal in times of danger, which made Ojin even more confused about the meaning of that gentle smile. Suddenly, Kalyan offered to place the ring on Ojin's finger himself, which terrified Ojin as he wasn't emotionally prepared for it. Ojin was overwhelmed with embarrassment as he saw the ring on his finger, and everyone applauded, saying it suited him perfectly. He began to nervously question whether what had just happened was even appropriate. Ojin felt a deep sadness, as he realized he had never worn a ring in his life before, and became increasingly anxious because of the strange nature of this one. He started to feel that the ring was extremely suspicious and might contain dark or dangerous magic. Due to his anxiety, Ojin politely told Kalyan that he couldn't accept the ring, explaining that he worked with his hands a lot and accessories didn't suit him. But Kalyan, with a gentle and completely unfazed smile, told Ojin he could think of the ring as a protective shield rather than an accessory, which left Ojin astonished by his calm response. Then Kalyan joked that since Ojin was a doctor, having something on his hand might be inconvenient, and said he would fix that problem for him easily. Kalyan suddenly cast a spell on Ojin's hand, making Ojin scream in fear from the surprise. In a matter of seconds, the ring transformed into a permanent mark on Ojin's finger, terrifying and stunning him with this strange phenomenon. Ojin stared at his finger in disbelief, wondering how he suddenly had a tattoo there, though he admitted it looked quite beautiful. Kalyan asked Ojin to place the emblem of the ring over his heart and say the words Kalyan Celestine, which confused and surprised Ojin with how odd the request was. When Ojin did so, a very bright light emerged from the mark on his finger. At that moment, Kalyan explained to Ojin that he could now communicate remotely with anyone else who possessed a telestron stone, which amazed Ojin, who compared it to a video call. Kalyan then asked Ojin to say the word light, and when he did, a brilliant light burst forth from the mark in an astonishing display. Ojin was overjoyed by this new feature, jumping with enthusiasm to express his excitement, while Kalyan and his aides smiled at him kindly. Afterward, Ojin sincerely thanked Kalyan for the wonderful gift, and Kalyan replied joyfully that he was glad Ojin liked it, while Selena sarcastically commented on how excited Ojin was despite having initially rejected the ring. Finally, Kalyan turned to Ojin and told him he had just one question to ask, to which Ojin responded with interest, curious to hear it. Kalyan began speaking to Ojin gently, asking where he had gotten the pendant he was wearing. Ojin felt a bit nervous and hesitantly replied that it was kind of a long story. Ojin told Kalyan that he had received the pendant from a dragon, which greatly shocked Kalyan, who repeated the word dragon in utter disbelief. Kalyan asked again, more seriously, if Ojin had really met a dragon. Ojin calmly confirmed it, which only deepened Kalyan's astonishment. At that, Kalyan informed Ojin that dragons had gone extinct nearly 1,000 years ago, which left Ojin stunned and repeating the word extinct in shock. Upon hearing that, one of the people present asked if that meant Ojin had been in this world for 1,000 years, but he quickly denied it with a laugh, commenting on her open-minded thinking. Ojin then explained the story of meeting the dragon in a humorous way, saying that the dragon had a sick pet bat and decided to summon a doctor. By coincidence, that doctor was him. He added that after treating the bat, the dragon gave him the pendant as a reward and promised to return him to his original world. But instead, he ended up in this strange one. At that moment, Ojin began to realize that the people around him were highly knowledgeable about magic, so he cautiously asked if anyone knew a way to return him to his own world. But then he suddenly noticed a strange silence falling over the room. Suddenly, everyone bowed before him and began calling him Spirit of Healing with great enthusiasm, saying they were honored to meet him in person. This completely shocked and stunned Ojin. Ojin was terrified and screamed inwardly, wondering why they were calling him the Spirit of Healing. He then remembered the dragon he had met earlier and suddenly realized that the dragon had seemed far too silly and friendly. In his memories, the dragon had danced and sung in a childish way, which made him realize that the dragon may not have been entirely serious when it summoned him. Ojin began to feel deeply frustrated and anxious, placing a hand over his face and letting out a heavy sigh. He then calmly tried to explain to everyone that there had been a huge misunderstanding, assuring them that he was just an ordinary human, not the Spirit of Healing they thought he was. Ojin clarified to them that his summoning had simply been a mistake made by the dragon, and that the bat he was called to treat wasn't really sick, just poorly cared for. But Kalyan gently insisted that, regardless, Ojin now possessed a pendant filled with dragon power, which made Ojin say that he had no choice but to accept it because the dragon had forced him into this world. Then, to Ojin's surprise, Kalyan grabbed his hands excitedly and called his name, which flustered Ojin, who quickly asked what he wanted. Kalyan explained seriously to Ojin that this world was currently going through a very grave crisis. He asked Ojin if he had ever heard of mana before. Ojin replied in confusion that he hadn't heard that term before. Kalyan began explaining that mana is the sacred life energy that forms the foundation of everything in this world. He stated that the amount of mana a living being possesses determines its strength and status, and that creatures like dragons once had immense stores of mana. Kalyan then added sadly that with the extinction of dragons, the other divine creatures also began disappearing one after another. He pointed out that many mythical creatures like dragons and leviathans had completely vanished. Even the world tree itself had begun to wither due to the ongoing mana shortage. Kalyan warned that if things continued like this, mana would soon run out entirely, putting future generations in serious danger. That's why the world's leaders had established a special organization to create emergency plans for this dire crisis. And thus, the Etherean Order was born, an organization whose mission is to monitor the environment and preserve natural balance. Then Kalyan told Ojin that there is an ancient legend in this world which says the Spirit of Healing would one day appear, wearing a pendant bearing the authority of dragons. Kalyan added excitedly that this Spirit of Healing would be the one to save this world, leaving Ojin confused and wondering to himself if they really meant him. Kalyan confidently confirmed that they had been waiting for his arrival all this time, but Ojin panicked and quickly told him there must be a huge misunderstanding. Kalyan began speaking formally and told Ojin that from this day forward, they would dedicate their lives entirely to protecting Kim Ojin as the Spirit of Healing. This left Ojin horrified and terrified, and he shouted loudly that this was absolutely unnecessary. Ojin felt extremely confused and overwhelmed by a deep sense of frustration, to the point that he was on the verge of losing his temper over the bizarre situation he found himself in. In the meantime, Ojin remembered the dragon who caused all this, and felt angry at him, cursing him internally, and blaming him for all the suffering he was going through. After some time, life returned to normal at Ojin's clinic, as work resumed routinely, and the next patients were admitted. The next patient was a flying fish named Lumi, 42 years old, and quite popular as a pet. After examining her, Ojin confirmed that she was in very good health with no signs of illness. However, the fish's owner asked in confusion why the fish couldn't fly despite being healthy. Ojin suggested that it might be due to aging, especially since 50 was the average lifespan for that type of fish. The owner sadly and understandingly accepted that explanation, agreeing that what Ojin said made sense. The woman then hesitantly asked if there was any way to slow the aging process or help the fish fly again, even if temporarily. Ojin gently explained that it would be very difficult. Ojin calmly explained that aging is a natural part of life, and she would need to come to terms with and accept that reality. Upon hearing this, the woman told Ojin sadly that her father had been bedridden since falling ill last year. She added that her father had loved flying fish deeply and used to raise many of them, but after he became bedridden, his fish began weakening one by one and gradually lost their ability to fly. Now only the fish Lumi remained with any flight ability. She added that Lumi was very dear to her father's heart, and he used to take her with him wherever he went. Then the woman told Ojin amusingly that when her father proposed to her mother, he gave her Lumi as a gift instead of a wedding ring. One of the other women present chimed in support, saying that using a flying fish for marriage proposals had actually been a global trend in the past, which greatly surprised Ojin. The owner explained that flying fish used to emit a faint glow from their bodies, which made Ojin wonder whether they really glowed in the dark. She further explained that, a few decades ago, flying fish were stunning when flying in flocks at night, glowing like stars, making them a common feature at major events and celebrations. Because of that, her father worked hard to obtain Lumi and released her into the night sky when proposing to her mother, which Ojin found to be a very strange idea. Afterward, her parents lived a happy married life for a long time. But a few years ago, her mother passed away from illness, and since then, her father's health had significantly declined. Now he remained isolated in his room all the time, spending his days caring only for his flying fish. She then added with deep concern that her father recently told her that if his flying fish lost their ability to fly, then his own life would come to an end as well. Ojin was deeply shocked by this, and began wondering to himself whether the woman's father was someone who was easily influenced by thoughts and emotions. One of the women commented sarcastically that they could simply buy a new set of healthy flying fish, but Ojin was taken aback by that idea and wondered if the woman was thinking in a shallow and extreme way. The owner began pleading with Ojin, desperately asking him to help Lumi regain her health and ability to fly, which visibly flustered Ojin. She then made a heartfelt request that he also help her father and save him from the despair he was currently living in. As Ojin watched the fish resting calmly on the pillow, he began screaming internally, pointing out to himself that he had already told her the fish was in very good health, and that the only issue was her natural aging.